Should we just... Oh, we don't need the preview thing.
Hang on. Do they think this is muted? Oh God, have we been streaming this time?
Oh,
we're live.
Oh.
Apparently we're live.
Wait, are we live?
Hello everyone, can you hear us?
Say in the chat if you can hear us. By the way, we can hear everything, maybe end this one and start a new one, I don't know.
yes, Music Gecko says yes. They can hear us. So
thanks for letting us know,
guys. Now this is what we're talking about. For some reason OBS is sending out some weird non-standard resolution, so let's fix this.
Okay, right, we're gonna start and stop, I think.
I think we may be staying on the same stream, but we'll be back in a sec, guys. Connection. Okay. Right.
Do we...
apparently we are... Again, we're offline.
Oh.
This is good. I feel really good at technical stuff.
Should we move to a new stream? That might sort the problem out.
I think it does its own... I think it does all of that itself. Okay. It says, live, welcome back. Elapsed time 1 minute, but now we're offline again. Oh my god. Why does nothing ever work? I mean, at this point, I'm not sure if we're live.
I have no idea.
I am watching what I say. I'm treating it as if we are live.
Yes, me too.
Apparently 11 people are watching, so...
We had 21 earlier, they're all left.
They probably thought the stream was just a minute long. In some sort of postmodern statement on the exam. So again we're offline, but we are streaming through OBS.
Do you want to try pressing stop?
The thing is I think YouTube is continuous. Like, it will just treat any live data as a stream. So
it might be good to get up something where we...
Okay, for some people it is live, some people it isn't live.
Okay, that's...
So that suggests people need to
refresh,
I guess.
I have... we go to...
It says the webcam is active, but they can't see us.
No.
Now, if I pull up
live stream now.
I'll just pull up the live stream on my phone, see if this is... Okay, it's still saying waiting for. So the live stream is now offline. Oh, did you... Right, I'm just going to send out a quick text to everyone. Hello, everyone. I will be helping Jasmine with the moderation tonight. We are having some minor technical difficulties, so bear with us. How is this? Is this...
Yeah, I think it still says start streaming. Okay. Oh, I thought that showed up for a second.
Yeah,
but
I
now
saw
it
that.
says...
Oh, we're live! We're live!
I think we're live! Should we swap places?
Yes,
so everyone gets to see my beautiful face.
Considering this is your show.
Okay, right. What does the chat have to say?
Stuff. There's this guy, this Byron guy. Hello everyone, I'll be helping with Jasmine for moderation tonight.
Right. Is that the right one?
I think.
Can you see my face?
I've not got it open. Oh, let me refresh the page.
Can I see you? We can hear you, but not see you.
Tell people they can be heard.
Can you see me now? Yes, I can see you now. Okay. That's good. We're rolling. Only 10 minutes. Oh, my watch says 7 minutes, so...
10 minutes, that's actually not too bad.
High five!
So, yes, it showed up as 2 separate streams.
Okay.
Please send this to me later when you unlist it.
Unlist it? No, I'm going to advertise.
Should I quickly change the name of the old stream to make sure people don't click on that by mistake?
Yeah, that might be a good idea.
Cool.
Go for it. He has access to my YouTube account currently, so...
Which is a very wise idea. It's got 82 views. I will be renaming it Whoops.
I hope none of those 82 are people we know. Well, actually, there's
It's got 3 likes, so
okay.
you've done pretty well.
Right, we're rolling. So, hello everyone. You can see my face now, which is good. I can't stop laughing now. To take a moment. So, I mean, I guess if you're here at 5 o'clock, you know what I'm up to. Going to be covering the whole of this bad boy, and also answering any questions you've got. I've got Byron here with me. Come show your face.
Oh no. Do I want to do this? Well, I can't bring the chair along, so I'm just going to have to squat in.
Just slide in.
Hello, everyone.
He's going to be moderating the chat and stuff like that.
I do intend on doing it. I'm
doing all
out
that
frame
stuff.
again.
Yeah, you can leave again now.
Oh, I'm so awful in front of the camera. I'm so sorry.
So yeah, I have this nice selection of notes of basic things to cover. At the end, the last section I hadn't gone through, made my like proper notes. I've been busy because I've been doing work experience all week because that's what we have to do. So I've been in with some like year R's. I mean, what can I say? I guess we should begin. Story time. This is for EdXL. I just saw someone asking what exam board it is.
Yes, don't worry, I've dealt with that.
I didn't see what it was. I want to know what it was now.
I will send you a screenshot in a second.
Okay.
It's funny, but it's not relevant.
Right. Yes. Let the story begin. So the first thing that you need to know about is reasonably basic, and it's... Oh, why did I put that at the start? You need to know about Anglo-Saxon society and the way it was structured. And I was thinking, where I've got videos on things, that I should just play the videos, but that's going to require some more technical stuff, so I should know what I'm doing here.
Yeah, did we set up OBS so that you could play video?
I have fiddled with OBS and I should be able to do
Marvellous.
it. First of all, I need to get up the video. So,
could be a good idea.
Yeah. Play some interlude music. Come up with them.
You're the one with OBS.
Sing yourself. There, you've got to sing it. Right. There it is in the folder called History Videos.
Deceptively full of geography videos.
Right. Anglo-Saxon and Norman England, that's where it's going to be. Oh. Wait, that's the new folder. Everything's organised into an old and a new version.
Oh, I see. Oh, Grange Hill asks, how long roughly is this going to last for?
I have absolutely no idea. If you get fed up of me, feel free to leave, but I'd prefer it if you didn't.
And I'm assuming this will be, I think we've set it up so you can watch this later as a VOD as well. So
next year can watch it as well. If they want to.
They will be forced to.
You will watch it. Get my views up. Alright, there we go.
I'm just going to put my phone on silent. So.
Right, it's going to be the MOV.
Oh, nice.
Right, I'm getting it up. Here we go. Right, OBS. The other direction. New scene. We'll just call it scene 2. I know what scene 2 is. That's awesome. It will probably have gone black a second, actually, as I'm setting this up. Where am I looking? Window capture. No. Why is that not showing up?
So, anything? I worry about dead air.
Yeah, I know. This isn't more technical failings.
Yes. Well, in fairness, this is your first ever.
I've never ever live streamed before,
no.
Despite all my previous YouTube endeavours, you know.
Oh, yeah.
The Minecraft YouTube channel that no one shall ever find.
Oh, don't worry, I've got one too.
Let's just try this one more time. If not, I'm gonna have to... I do have an idea for another way to do this. Sorry.
Oh, I think you're broadcasting a black screen at the moment.
Yeah, I am broadcasting a black screen at the moment. As I'm trying to sort stuff out. I'm useless.
It's secretly a tribute to Malovich.
I thought if I opened up this, it would be able to window capture it.
Yeah, it should.
Wait.
I think you can play video in OBS directly, can't you?
Can you?
Yeah, I think there's an option for it. If you press that, and I think media source is...
Media source?
Yes. Right in the middle.
Right in the middle. Okay, right, media source.
Now, I think if you double click on that, you should be able to open up a video. For people who are wondering what the issue is, I've seen a couple of these in the chat. We're trying to play a video at the moment, but we haven't worked out how to get OBS to sort it out, but I think we've just figured it out. I realise how well not that it's really that important, how well people can hear me.
Yeah.
Because I could be addressing them and nothing.
Oh wait, I've just clicked.
OBS and YouTube directly. Yeah, I think we've worked out the actual OBS problem. It's more just playing the video back. So we get rid of one OBS problem, and a new one rears its head.
I think we just decided to make this nice and complicated. Okay.
The Anglo-Saxons. Let's lay the basics down.
It's too big.
And
first of all, who were they?
Deafening. Apologies.
The Anglo-Saxons were the people who settled in England after the Romans left.
I can't.
They came from parts of what is now Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands. There were roughly 2 million Anglo-Saxons, which, despite being an incredibly large number, was actually very tiny for a population. If you consider the current population of England is around 55 million. One explanation for this low population could be the low life expectancy and high infant mortality rates. Most of the population farmed land in order to grow the resources they needed to live. So now we have the very basics. What about the structure of Anglo-Saxon society? Almost every society that ever has been or is has at least some form of hierarchy. Someone at the top, perhaps a king, and a large group of people right at the very bottom, normally the poor. Anglo-Saxon society is certainly no exception to this. At the very bottom of the social hierarchy were slaves, making up roughly 10% of the population. They could be bought and sold and were seen as property. However, slaves were punished less harshly for committing crimes, so to not damage their ability to work. Across the water, the Normans thought slave ownership was barbaric, but for Anglo-Saxons, slaves were a normal part of life. Next up in the hierarchy were the peasant farmers, who made up most of the population, as shown by this diagram I've nicked from the textbook. Peasant farmers would rent small farms from a lord, doing a certain amount of work for him, before they were allowed to use the rest of their harvest to support themselves and their family. And if they didn't do the work for the lord, they could risk losing their rights to use the land, which would be a disaster. There was another type of peasant farmer as well, the churl. Churls were free peasant farmers who were not tied to their land. Like the ordinary peasant farmer, the churl would do work on the land for a lord. However, they could go and work for a different lord if they wished to. Moving up the ladder, we find thanes, local lords. By the year 1060, England had between 4,000 and 5,000 thanes. In order to become a thane, you must meet certain requirements, such as owning more than 5 hides of land. Hides, by the way, was a measurement of land, roughly similar to 120 acres. Anyway, a thane must own more than 5 hides of land and live in a manor with a tower and separate church. Thanes formed part of the aristocracy. They were its warrior class. Earls sat at the top of the aristocracy, above thanes and second from the king. They ruled over vast areas of land called earldoms. They would compete with each other as well, through loyalty, to be the most trusted and relied on by the king. Some would even sometimes challenge the king to gain further power. Of course, at the top sat the king himself, but there isn't really much to say about him. He just kind of did what most kings do, ruled. Unlike the rest of Europe, where social status depended on ancestry, who your parents were and their parents and their parents. In Anglo-Saxon society, there was room to move up and down the social ladder. A successful peasant, for instance, or a merchant who made many successful trips in their ship and fitted all the criteria, could become a thane. Slaves could be freed by their masters, and churls could sell themselves into slavery as a desperate measure. Successful thanes could become earls, kings, and bad earls could be demoted to thanes. So there we have it, Anglo-Saxon society.
Okay.
Let's hope you can hear all of that. Right. Okay, so hopefully that covered the kind of basic breakdown of Anglo-Saxon society. I felt like just playing back my video is probably better than listening to me waffle, because I'm very good at waffling and it's going to be more clear if... That covers the whole of the first page of the textbook. And slightly more than the first page of the textbook as well. Oh, the first 2 pages, in fact. And so... In fact, yeah. So one thing to mention is, hopefully you know this by now, but what a hide is. That's an important kind of keyword that you need to be aware of. And so a hide is a measurement of land, roughly equal to 120 acres. But so long as you know that it's a measurement of land and it's a reasonable size of land. I think I said in that last video that you need 5 hides of land to be a thane. And quite a lot of Saxon stuff is broken down into hides. Now the next important bit is this first section of the textbook I've covered quite well in terms of videos, because I quite like Anglo-Saxon stuff. And also, there are so few people in Saxon England, I can just use the same characters again, I don't have to redraw everything, so it's easier to make videos on Saxon stuff. So yeah, the next bit is about Edward the Confessor and the power of the English monarchy. So, time for some, hopefully I've got this nailed a bit better this time. Right. Wish me luck. It's going to go to a black screen again for a moment whilst I find the file, and then another video should start playing.
Is there I'll have to work this out in a sec, but
It's 1060. Edward the Confessor is the King of England. He's the most powerful man in Anglo-Saxon England and governs the country. But how powerful is he really? 1060. The power of the English monarchy. The king's role is to protect his people from attack, and to give them laws to maintain safety and security at home. In return, the people of England owe him service. When they reach age 12, every boy swears an oath to be faithful to the king. The oath is administered by a shire reeve, at a special ceremony held each year. The shire reeve is the king's official in an area, his sheriff. Among other things, they manage the king's estates, collect revenue for him, and are in charge of local courts. The King of England, in 1060, has many powers. One power he has is to create new laws and make sure they're enforced throughout the country. The king also controls the production of the silver pennies used by the Anglo-Saxons as money, giving him lots of control over money within his kingdom. He also owns large estates and can grant land to his followers, or take land from anyone who acts against him. To further his power, he can also raise a national army and fleet, and he has the power of taxation. He can decide when taxes should be paid, and a national taxation system delivers this tax to him. In return, the people of England have duties to their king. To obey the law as it is passed down through the king's representatives. To use the king's coins. Forging coins is a very serious crime. Moreover, any land they have comes with obligations to the king, such as tax and military service. Landholders also have an obligation to provide and equip fighters for the army or fleet. Otherwise, they are fined or lose their land. The main reason the Anglo-Saxon kings hold their power is because they lead the armies. This had been the case since the Saxon kings of the past had clawed back England from Viking control. Kings who are war leaders gain legitimacy as they can hand out the land and wealth of their defeated enemies. However, when kings aren't successful in war, it can weaken them. As Edward isn't a warrior king, he has to rely on his earls, especially Earl Godwin, to protect England from attack. His earls and their thanes are a powerful military force. But, as a result of Edward not being a war leader, he has to use other reasons to reinforce his legitimacy. Edward is a respected lawmaker. Anglo-Saxon society as a whole values kings who keep things peaceful, as quarrels between families are common, and can frequently break into fighting, which threatens everyone in a community. Moreover, Edward is pious. He is very religious. Anglo-Saxon kings claim they have a special link to God. They are anointed as a representative of Christ on earth. It's believed that a worthy king can bring God's blessing to his country, and that God can guide his actions. Saxon kings need to rule the whole of England. However, half of it, the Danelaw, is Anglo-Danish, creating an administrative challenge. Many of the Danelaw's inhabitants are descendants of Viking invaders, and, whilst they accept Edward's rule, they want to be ruled by local men and to follow their own laws and customs. However, Edward faces a much bigger problem than the Danelaw, from one of his own earls, Earl Godwin. Godwin is Earl of Wessex, the richest earldom. Godwin and his family own so much land that they are as rich as the king. And, whilst Saxon society views disloyalty to your lord as the ultimate crime, it doesn't stop Godwin from putting pressure on Edward to do things his way. For instance, he pressures Edward into appointing some of his men to important church positions, or to give earldoms to his sons. In 1050, tensions peak. Edward has ordered Godwin to punish the people of Dover after a visiting embassy, an official visit by representatives of one ruler to another, from Boulogne, is attacked. Godwin refuses. As a result, with the help of two important earls, Siward of Northumbria and Leofric of Mercia, Edward forces Godwin into exile. However, in 1051, Godwin returns. This time, though, he has brought with him an army and a fleet. His request is for him to be able to come back and for his earldom to be restored. Under fear of war, Edward agrees. 1060, the power of the English monarchy. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell all your friends. Also, I want to say
Don't think you need me plugging myself at the end there.
Nah, at this point, I think people know who you are.
Yeah. Right, so that covers the whole of the king, which is taking us on to page 12. We're blitzing through this. The next thing you need to know about is government. And in the case, there wasn't much in the way of government in Anglo-Saxon England. Obviously, you've got the king, who's like the head of everything, and then there's the Witan, who you need to know about. They're made of aristocrats and archbishops, earls, that kind of... the very important top people of society, I mean archbishops and earls, are aristocrats. And they act as like an advisory body to the king. And one important thing you need to know about what they do, beyond the fact they're an advisory body, is that they appoint a new king every time the old king dies. Now, obviously, you probably know this, but I mean, you should do. But this is very important when it came to a certain Edward the Confessor dying and 4 people wanting to take his place.
Ain Ford asks, Earl Godwin was the Earl of where?
Earl Godwin was the Earl of Wessex.
Shall I sneak across and turn on the light?
Oh, yeah. Go for it.
We do have fancy studio
lighting. You can walk past if you want.
I can walk past, yes.
Yeah, so earldoms are another important thing to talk about. Earls, they were like the head of the earldom, so earldom's a big section of the country ruled by an earl. They had some important things, so they'd collect taxes, and they'd collect taxes for the king, and they'd get to see massive light in the corner of my... They collect taxes for the king, and then they got to keep about 1/3 of the taxes. And they also got to oversee justice within their earldom. So, like, punish people, crimes, that kind of thing. If you do crime and punishment, you'll know quite a lot of that stuff. They had housecarls who were like basically their bodyguards, but they're like elite soldiers, and they were military leaders within the kingdom. And the king would rely often on, particularly in the case of Edward the Confessor, where he was a less powerful and forward king, the king would rely on his earls to keep the country defended. Important keywords that you should probably know about. The way land's divided, that kind of thing. So shires, they're reasonably... You notice that counties in this country have shire on the end, so they're reasonably big areas of land, but not like super, super massive. Not as big as an earldom, and the country was divided up into shires. So like I live in Hampshire with a Hampshire, and there are lots of other places, Wiltshire, all around the country, shires. You're looking at me.
Yeah, I don't know why. No, I was going to say, I think Hampshire's a fairly recent name. I think it used to be Southamptonshire until like the 60s.
I think it was too.
Yeah, so...
Yeah, but...
Again, tying into what you're saying. I'm just showing off.
So tithings, another important thing to get your head around. That was a group of 10 households, and they were all collectively responsible for one another. So quite a lot of the way, like, admin type stuff was done in tithings. Shire reeves are important to know about. Shire reeves were important responsibility. They were important individuals who had quite a lot of responsibilities. They were essentially the king's official in an area. So they collected the Yeld tax, written Geld tax, but as far as I'm aware it should be pronounced Yeld. I might be wrong. They collected fines from the Shire court. That kind of general collecting things for the king and overseeing justice, making sure that the king's orders were carried out. They had instructions issued to them by writs. They had to witness the Shire court as well. And then the third, which is an important thing to know about. That was the way the military was made up. So you'd get, within a tithing, they'd have to send someone forward for the third, known as, in this case, there would be the general third, which is the people in their army who didn't travel outside their local area to fight. And so the tithing would put forward a person for the third, and my brain's just fallen off the rails. Person will put forward my brain's gone.
Your brain's gone.
I spent too long explaining something. Yeah, the third, they're like the military. Oh, come on, brain. Come back. It's gone to another place. There's the select third, who are men who would gather anywhere in the country, so it's slightly more elite, and they'd fight for the king. And then you got the general third, who were like the army, who would stay within their local area. Tithings had to put forward people for the third. There we go. Got it out eventually. 40 days third service for the third. Remember that. That's a good fact to have. It was also important in the defeat of Harold Godwinson and the English at the Battle of Hastings as well. Blood feuds and the War Guild are important things to know about as well. Blood feuds are where one family someone would kill someone, and then the family of the person who had been killed would then go back and try and kill kill that person, and then as like revenge for killing someone in their family, and the two families would end up just taking it in turns to kill people. And it was a big problem in Saxon England, so the War Guild was introduced to try and stop this, and basically it was compensation for killing someone. So Churl says here was worth 20 shillings if they were killed. That would 20 shillings would be paid to the family of the victim to try and stop them going off and killing family members of other people. That was reasonably effective as far as I'm aware. Collective responsibility is another important thing to talk about. So hue and cry was a system where if a crime was committed, if you saw a crime being committed, you would have to drop everything, go and catch the person and cry out for help, and then everyone in the area was going to chase after and catch the person. And if they didn't catch the person, then it would be like the fault of the community for not catching the criminal. And again, tithings are important in collective responsibility, because those 10 households would hold responsibility over one another. What was that, Luke?
Oh, no.
Any questions?
Yeah, I'm seeing the word botchgilt come along. Botchgilt come along. Up a lot, so I don't know if that's... And then there's also a question for me, which I'm just about to answer.
I don't know what that word means.
No, or verhild. Oh, and there's been a few questions about that as well.
Resistance against women. Yes, so the Saxon economy, you don't really need to know that much about it. They did a lot of trading in wool and cloth. They had some silver coins from Germany. Don't really need to know these things. About 10% of people lived in towns in 1066. Shires had essentially a capital, so a main town, as counties these days still do. So the capital of Hampshire is Winchester. In fact, it was the capital of England at one stage. Got a nice big statue of Alfred the Great. Burhs were fortified towns. They'd been built in such a way so that, in theory, no one was more than 20 miles from a burh, and trade had to happen within the burh. Villages is not something you particularly need to be aware of, but it's good for your contextual knowledge. Villages, whereas you think of a village now as a small little group of houses round like a church or something like that, villages tended to be a bit more spread out. So you'd have fewer houses, but rather than you'd have the fields on the outside of the village, you'd have the fields just kind of spread throughout the village. The church is an important thing to talk about. Basically anything in history, the church comes up. The English church was so they were Catholic at the time, because obviously this is before Protestantism became a thing. They were very resistant to reforms within Europe. So, there were quite a lot of church reforms going on in Europe at the time, and the Saxon church were like, oh, we'll keep doing it as we were. They were centred quite a lot around local saints, so Saxon and Celtic saints. They'd have bishops who'd control large areas of land and church type stuff. Bishops were on the Witan, so obviously they were very important people. Tension between bishops and churches happened quite a lot. So tension between bishops and churches set up by thanes. So when a thane would have to have their own personal church in order to be a thane, and thanes often wanted to have their control over the area, and then the bishops would be like, no, I want to control the church in your area. So there was a bit of tension going on there. Over time, these churches set up by thanes were gradually brought under bishops' control. Obviously, that happened a lot more rapidly when William the Conqueror came along. Local priests were generally quite ordinary people. They were able to get married, which is something that they couldn't do in the rest of Europe, and the Normans thought this was absolutely disgraceful. How dare a priest get married? Many of the priests couldn't even read in Latin, and they'd have quite small landholdings like peasants. There were monasteries within Saxon England, but they were on decline, and they're not really anything important. Whereas in Normandy there were lots of monastery stuff going on. And the monarch was obviously appointed by God, as is often the case in history. Yes, God definitely appointed the monarch. That's the end of the section. That was a question I was going to answer. Someone asked about how to answer a 12-mark explain question.
So it's a 16-mark narrative question.
That's what I meant. I was thinking of the 16-mark. 16-mark question.
It's Alex, I think.
Alex. All right, Alex. I haven't actually covered this in a video, but I have a video on how to answer a 12-mark explain question, and that says basically you want to do 3 Peel paragraphs, and when you get the question, you'll get 2 bullet points, and the third bullet point will be an information of your own. So you use those as, or the third thing will be something of your own. So you use those as the basis for your paragraphs. And then to make it from a 12-mark to a 16-mark question, you want to add an introduction and a conclusion. So a 16-mark question will have a statement and how far do you agree. So you can have your introduction as, I agree with this statement, or I disagree with this statement, and then basically just say what's going to be the points in your next 2 paragraphs. And then your conclusion, you'll be, in conclusion, I agree with this, I disagree with this, and then briefly sum up why, like in a couple of sentences. Right, we're on to section 1.2. The last years of Edward the Confessor and the succession crisis. House of Godwin. They're quite important. I mean, you saw Earl Godwin come up in the video earlier. Earl Godwin's quite important. He became an important earl under King Canute, and then he was quite important because he helped Edward the Confessor to become king. And he was also, Edward the Confessor was also married to Godwin's daughter. I was about to say brother. Godwin's daughter. It was Harold Godwinson's sister.
I see. That's
right. I know things. Yeah, so. Earl Godwin's daughter, Edith of Wessex, was married to Edward the Confessor. And marriages like that were very important in the Saxon period and just generally across Europe at that time. In 1053, Earl Godwin dies. Harold Godwinson becomes the new Earl of Wessex. 1055, Tostig becomes Earl of Northumbria. Quite a lot of people in that family got to be important places, so you got, I think, Gurth? I know. I think that's how it's pronounced. He became Earl of East Anglia in 1057. Leofwine got Kent in 1057. These are all Godwinsons. One of the potential reasons for this happening, like Godwins being allowed to have so much power, because they were basically equal in power to the king at that point, is that there was quite a lot of threat from Norway, and so they needed to have the military power, and Edward the Confessor obviously wasn't that much of a military type king, so he let the Godwins do it for him. Another important topic to hit on is Harold's embassy to Normandy, which hopefully you know about, but just as a quick refresher, it happened in the summer of 1064. Harold landed in, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, but like Ponthieu. It's spelt Ponthieu. You might know.
Where is it?
There it is.
I want to say Ponthieu.
Ponthieu. Alright.
I could be wrong.
It doesn't matter how you pronounce these things, it's only how you spell them. This isn't where he was probably going to land. He was probably blown off course by a storm or something along those lines. Count Guy of Ponthieu took him as prisoner, and Duke William heard about it and was like, oh, this is not good, and demanded that Count Guy handed Harold over. Harold then spent a bit of time with King William, or Duke William in fact at that point, Duke William of Normandy, in Normandy, and he helps William with 2 military campaigns, and William gives him gifts of weapons and armour, which is quite symbolic at the time of like, I'm your lord, or yeah, I'm your lord, you're like serving me, that kind of thing. Harold relays King Edward's message, so an embassy is like an official visit to go from one country to another, and he relays whatever the message that Edward said was. No one actually knows what the message that Edward said was, and it's very, very disputed, so the Normans have one story, the Saxons have another. And at some point in the trip, Harold makes an oath to Duke William, and he swears on 2 holy relics, but no one knows what the oath was about, and the Normans claim it was an oath of allegiance. So this is very important, because later on, when William claims the throne, and then Harold gets the throne, the oath, if it was an oath of allegiance, Harold, like, surpassing William, taking the throne, means that he's broken that oath, which obviously, when you're in a very religious society, breaking an oath is a terrible thing. So the Norman story for that is that the purpose of the embassy was to discuss William's succession to the English throne and to swear allegiance, and the Saxons say that it was to recover some hostages. So Wulfnoth Godwinson and I think it was Harold's nephew, a guy called Hakon, can't quite remember the relation, but they were like, 2 hostages, and the Saxons reckon those are the hostages that they went to go and recover. Another important thing to touch on is the rising against Tostig, and I have a video on that, so let's go and find it. I think I kind of know what I'm doing now here.
Oh, good.
Right. Should have gone black. Let's add source.
To keep the microphone on until you...
Yes, the microphone's still on.
Don't just think it's ended. Gecko, if you're wondering, I'm just adding some more dates as well, so there's going to be another message incoming.
What's going on there?
Dates of important events in the Cold War topic.
Ooh.
So this is some excellent memory work on my part.
Ah, good job.
So far I've only had to look up one thing, and...
Right. Right. Rising against Tostig. Here it is. Should start playing now.
It's 10:55. Earl Siward of Northumbria has just died, and a new Earl has been appointed. Tostig Godwinson. Tostig is younger brother of Harold Godwinson, Earl of Wessex, and this new appointment only goes to strengthen the power of the Godwins. 1065. The rising against Earl Tostig. Northumbria is an important earldom. It's large and guards the border with Scotland. It's a long way from the king's power base in the south and has a long history of Viking attacks and settlement, making it the obvious entry point for further Viking invasions. Northumbria is very different from Wessex, where Tostig and his family are from. Much of it is part of the Danelaw, meaning there are many different laws and customs. For example, there are many more churls, peasants not tied to a lord. People in the Danelaw also use a lot of words borrowed from the Scandinavian languages of the Vikings. In the Danelaw, 100 is called a wapentake, and a hide a carucate. This means southerners like Tostig probably struggle to understand the Northumbrians. And as time goes on with Tostig as leader, resentment begins to build against him, for many reasons. Tostig is friends with Malcolm III, King of Scotland, and this means he doesn't defend against Scottish attacks. In 1061, while Tostig is away, Malcolm invades Northumbria and causes much destruction. However, Tostig does not retaliate and instead agrees peace terms, causing his people to feel betrayed. Tostig has been unjust, imposing new laws from the south and abusing his power to get rid of rivals. His enemies complain that he has falsely accused people of crimes in order to take money and land from them. Moreover, he has taxed Northumbria too heavily. The Yeld tax was originally used to pay off Viking attacks. Thus, northern Danelaw regions pay taxes at a much lower rate than the rest of the country. The Danelaw isn't used to heavy taxation, and this really builds resentment. To add to this, Tostig is a southerner, and Northumbria has always been governed by northerners. Until now, the southern Anglo-Saxon kings had generally left the north to govern itself. In 1064, Tostig invites 2 followers of Gospatrick, a leading Northumbrian aristocrat, to York. Whilst there, he murders them. Soon after, Gospatrick himself is assassinated, after he travels south to King Edward's court to complain about Tostig to the king. The people of Northumbria view this as the worst kind of treachery, and this is the final blow for them. In 1065, an uprising begins, with the rebels marching on York, the city from where Northumbria is governed. There, they kill as many of Tostig's housecarls and servants as they can find, and declare Tostig an outlaw. They invite Morcar, the brother of the Earl of Mercia, to be their earl instead. King Edward holds a conference to decide what to do about the rising. Harold and the king's other advisors agree that Tostig is to blame for the rising. Tostig is furious that Harold has not backed him, and accuses Harold of conspiring against him, saying the rising was a plot to replace him. Edward commands that an army be raised to put down the rising, but Harold and the other earls make excuses, disobeying this command, leaving Edward with no choice but to accept the rebels' demands. As a result, Harold soon meets with the rebels and passes on King Edward's agreement to their terms. The rebels had actually been quite diplomatic in their choice of Morcar as a leader. They could have pushed for a northerner, like Waltheof, the son of their previous earl, but instead they chose Morcar, a southerner. To cement the agreement, Harold then marries Morcar's sister, his second wife, and is given large landholdings in Mercia. The rising had begun in early October, but by the 1st of November, Tostig is exiled. There are a few possible reasons why Harold chooses to betray his brother and the king. It is likely that by this point he wants to be king himself. Edward is old and ill, thus Harold feels he can push the king's boundaries further. Tostig is a potential rival to the throne, so this is a good opportunity to eliminate this opposition. Furthermore, if Harold is soon to become king, then he needs a united country against the growing threats from Normandy and Scandinavia. The refusal of the earls to obey the king is also significant. After all, they are bound to him by oaths of loyalty and are supposed to act as his military leaders. This shows that the power of the king can sometimes be challenged if the king is weak and it's in the interests of the major earls to act together. 1065, the Rising against Earl Tostig. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and tell all your friends. And whilst you're here on the internet, you should definitely check out my Twitter because you'll find some excellent, high quality, top notch, absolutely hilarious content there. And it won't take you 2 seconds. It also won't take you 2 seconds to go on down into the description.
Right, we're back. How was that?
Decent.
Right, the Rising against Tostig. There's one more thing to cover and then that's the end of section 1.2. And that's that Edward the Confessor dies. I hope you know that Edward the Confessor died.
Spoilers.
He had some deathbed words which are kind of important. He said, "I commend this woman," and it's got square brackets, Edith, "with all the kingdom to your protection," and he said it to Harry. I've written Harry here, I mean Harold Godwinson. My notes, it's always like Harry and Will.
Oh, I see why.
It's like, Tostig is like toast. And that's the end of section 1.2. Again, and then the rival claimants to the throne, which is a very, very important thing to remember. No, actually, we had a direct... So there's a drinks delivery outside.
Right. I will...
So, the throne claimants... Just see the chaos out the corner of my eye. So, obviously there's Harold Godwinson. Shh. Harold Godwinson and his deathbed words are like his claim to the throne. Obviously his claim also comes from his family connection. He was basically the right-hand man to the king, and he had a lot of influence with earls and thanes, and a lot of military prowess. And that made him...
Is this one?
Lift the handle.
Lift it what, up this way?
Yeah.
Oh.
And then turn it.
Oh! Sorry. Well, I still can't do it.
You need me to do it?
Yeah.
We're having door troubles.
First technical problems, and now I can't open the door. What can I actually do right?
There you go.
I'm so sorry about that.
Right.
Thank you. Right. I'm assuming one of these drinks is for you.
Yeah. Whichever one isn't.
Black coffee.
Yeah.
Okay, right, excellent.
Hey, I got some tea. Right.
I've got black coffee.
Complete with oat milk in it. Oh, I know.
Well, I've dropped milk entirely now, for people who care.
Oh.
Which is officially no one, because you said that.
Anyway, yeah, so Harold Godwinson, another important... He had quite a strong claim to the throne. Edgar Atheling. Atheling actually just means, like, prince in waiting. So sometimes it's written as Edgar the Atheling. But you can just say Edgar Atheling. That's acceptable. He was Edward the Confessor's nephew, and he was like only a teenager at the time. At the time when this happened, so that kind of weakened his... Well, it didn't weaken his claim, because he had like a blood claim to the throne, because he was Edward's nephew, and also he'd like been brought up by Edward. But because he was a teenager, and there were quite a lot of like military threats at the time, probably not a good idea to have a teenager running the country when you're about to be invaded, probably from like 4 different sides. Well, 2 sides. Possibly 3. Yeah, so he had a strong, like, theoretical claim, but in reality his claim wasn't actually that strong, or the likeliness of this. Then there's Harald Hardrada, who was the king of Norway, and there had been some secret Viking deals and treaties, which it does actually explain it in the textbook here, but I don't think it's really worth explaining it. There's a dude called Magnus Olafsson or something like that, and he dies, and then there are lots of complicated things, but technically, you can read through it, technically it gives Harold a right to, like, the English throne, but, like, none of the kings of Norway previously had taken up on this offer because it just wasn't worth it. So it was probably when Tostig came along on his, like, journey after he'd been not very happy with the fact that Harold had abandoned him and been like, yeah, we should get rid of him from Northumbria. And he'd gone around and tried to get support, and then he'd come to Harold Hardrada, and it was probably then that Tostig had been like, yeah, no one likes the English king, honest. Come and invade with me. And that gave Harold the confidence. Harold, like Hardrada, just to clarify, there's Harold and Harald. That gave Harold the confidence to, like, go and invade, probably. Then obviously there's Duke William of Normandy, who, I mean, he's very important. Gotta know about him. Obviously there's the embassy to Norway. Supposedly in 1051 Edward had promised William the throne, and William's claim had the Pope's backing. However, the Witan didn't choose William because, like, he was a Norman. Who wants a Norman governing their country? So Harold then got coronated because Harold Godwinson was chosen to be king. Became King Harold II. He went to York to chat with the Witan members, about not, and he just wanted to make sure that he actually had the support of the Witan, who hadn't been there in the initial meeting in London. So Edward the Confessor had died in London, and I think it was just after Christmas, so quite a lot of the Witan members had been in London anyway, but the few that hadn't been there were up in York, so he went to York to check that those lot also wanted him as king, so that he had full support. And then he gathered the largest army that England had ever seen, and a big fleet, and he stationed that fleet on the south coast of England. The sentence I've written here in my, like, brief notes says, Tostig did some sailing and didn't work out, so went and chilled with Mr. Hardrada. I mean, yeah, that's another thing. Tostig was, like, going around at this point trying to gather support against Harold Godwinson. In September, obviously, if you remember earlier, the Third, which had been quite important in gathering this army that Harold had, they only did 40 days service, so obviously they'd have to be disbanded eventually, and also it's quite costly to keep an army just waiting. You got to feed them, you got to make sure they've got all their stuff. In September, the army stands down and the fleet gets refitted. Then the next important event to know about is the Battle of Gate Fulford. So we're getting to some juicy stuff here. Gate Fulford, it's where Harold Hardrada and Tostig Godwinson invade. So they arrive on the east coast of England, like northeast, and they march down the River Humber to York. And on their way, they're met by an army. Their path is blocked by an army which is led by Edwin and Morcar at a place called Gate Fulford. You can guess from the name that, I mean, you should probably know this anyway. The Battle of Gate Fulford happened at Gate Fulford. So yeah, there's a battle there. Edwin and Morcar lost. They were probably outnumbered by the Vikings, but also Hardrada was a very experienced, like, Danish war leader, so he probably had quite good tactics. And Edwin and Morcar made a bad decision by having their back stationed to marshland. So when they realised they were losing, Edwin and Morcar couldn't just run away because there was a load of marsh behind them, so they all got stuck in the marsh, and the Vikings cut them down. I believe it was said the Vikings were boasting about how there were so many Englishmen dead in the mud that they could walk across the marsh without getting their boots dirty. So yeah, Harold hears about this invasion, and he goes north. At this point, he, obviously, because messages take quite a while to get backwards and forwards at this time, not got any computers. Horse is, like, the fastest mode of transport. So Harold hears about this, but he hears of the invasion, and he goes north, but he hasn't heard about Gate Fulford yet. So obviously at some point on his way up he does hear about Gate Fulford. Obviously going north is quite a big decision because there's still the threat of invasion from Normandy. And William's quite a big threat. He's quite renowned at being very good at a war, good at fighting. And so he thought that it was too late in the year for William to cross the Channel safely because there would have been quite a lot of storms, and getting an army across the Channel, that's quite a dangerous and tricky challenge. So presumably Harold thought that it's safe to go across now, so he goes across, and so Harold goes north, probably thinking that William won't be able to go across the Channel. So Harold comes up to meet them. Harold Hardrada and Tostig, they march off to York. York surrenders without actually fighting. They exchange hostages. Hostages in this time period means, like, basically you'd give away a person from your community, and in a way of honouring the agreement, and then the person gets looked after by the people who, like, the hostage has been given to, and if you do anything bad, like by breaking the agreement, they'll hurt the person you gave.
Bit like, is it, not Theon Greyjoy, Thingy Greyjoy from Game of Thrones.
I haven't seen any Game of Thrones.
No, you haven't. I forget this.
People on watching probably have seen Game of Thrones.
Yeah, it's Theon Greyjoy. It's been a while.
Yeah, so do.
See?
Do some nasty things to their hostages if the agreement gets broken. However, Harold Hardrada and Tostig demand more hostages because they want more people to hurt when their agreement goes wrong. And they get told that they're going to be sent these hostages or given the hostages at Stamford Bridge. So on the 25th of September, see where this is going, some Vikings are just chilling, waiting for the hostages to come along, and they're all just waiting, not expecting a fight. Suddenly, Harold Godwinson, that Harold, he comes running over the hill with an army. He used a hill to, like, I don't know if he went over the hill, but he used a hill to hide his approach, and he launches a surprise attack on the Vikings, and it was a successful surprise attack. The Vikings had their swords and shields, but they'd left quite a lot of their army and also their armour on the ships. What are you about to?
Oh no, sorry. My apologies. I've misread a comment. I thought there was an issue with the stream.
Okay. Phew.
Sorry. Continue with the stream of consciousness.
Yep. So, you put me off now. Yeah. Harold's housecarls eventually broke through Harold's shield wall, and Harold Godwinson wins the fight. And then, whilst he's up in York, Harold then hears that William has landed, after all, 28th September in Pevensey Bay. And that brings us to the Battle of Hastings, which is quite a significant event. There's quite a lot to say about the Battle of Hastings, but I presume you know quite a lot about it anyway, because it's an important thing. But we'll go for it. So, Harold didn't manage to achieve a surprise attack. William's scouts spotted him and told William of Harold's advance. Harold comes marching down. I think it takes him a 5-day march down to the south coast from York. I mean, that must have been one hell of a walk, especially when you're, like, wearing chainmail and all that kind of thing. The fact that William's scouts had informed him of Harold's arrival meant that he was able to get his army to leave Hastings and then threaten Harry's army. There was this race for a hill, Coldbeck Hill, just outside Hastings, in a place that's now called Battle. Wonder why it's called Battle. And Harold managed to get control of the hill. There's marshland on either side of the hill, so, like, obviously it's not good to be at the bottom of a hill in the marsh. The battle lasted 8 hours, which is really long for a medieval battle, so it shows you just how evenly matched these two sides were. You know, justice for Harold.
Justice for Harold, yeah. See, some places are 10 years out of date with their comedy. We're like 10 minutes, so it's okay.
Yeah, so at the start of the, beginning, William sends forward his archers, but the English are like, oh, we got a shield wall, who cares about the arrows? They just kind of went onto the shields. William sent up his foot soldiers, but the English are there like, we've got the shield wall, we've got our axes, die, killed a few more, didn't go very well for William. Cavalry went up the hill, but obviously they're going uphill, so it's more of a labouring up the hill, didn't break the shield wall again. This basically just continued on throughout the day, where the Normans are like, sending attack after attack. Saxon shield wall did quite well for quite a long time. And then, a difficult stage for the Normans, a rumour went round the Normans that Will had been killed. Dun dun dun.
Dun dun dun.
I mean, spoilers, he hadn't been killed.
We do need a soundboard
for
these live streams, I think.
And it's written quite confusingly in the textbook here. Some people say that the feigned retreat was a separate thing, and some people say that this was the feigned retreat. But I believe the feigned retreat, as far as I'm aware, is a separate tactic used from internet research I've done. But the internet research I did was a while ago, so it's not super fresh in my mind. So if you think you know better than me, you probably do know better than me. But yeah, when this rumour went round that Will had been killed, he tips back his helmet and is like, no, I'm still alive, come fight again. At some point, some of Harold Godwinson's men disengaged from the shield wall, which is basically where it started to all go downhill, and they went and probably to chase down some Normans that they thought were fleeing to try and slaughter them, but it could also have been to try and grab some of the stuff from the Normans that had been killed, because quite a lot of the men here were from the General Third, and they often just had pitchforks and that kind of thing to fight with, so why not take some of the Norman stuff and actually get some proper fighting gear? I just realised we never turned that light back on.
No, we didn't. We didn't turn it on in the first place, so...
It's been on for a small period of time.
It's actually a UFO, everyone. That's our excuse.
Yeah, so they gradually, this point, William finally starts making some progress and cutting down Harold's wall. In fairness to Harold's lot, they had just marched for 5 days. Justice for Harold. So the Saxons were gradually reduced, and finally the cavalry charges started to become more effective as the shield wall weakened, and eventually the shield wall was broken through, and at that point that was basically when the battle was finally lost. So they broke through the shield wall, suddenly the defences weren't good enough, and it was just a case of, for the Normans, slaughtering the last few. Harold got killed, not by an arrow through his eye. That was a rumour that came about 100 years later, I think is the first mention of Harold thing through the eye. I did do some research on it a while ago. See, I remember the things I find out. Harold, all his brothers are killed. His housecarls, fought to the end, because that's what housecarls had to do. It's the honour. And the rest of the Third were just we'll run off! And William had won. Why did William win? If you talk about the tactics on either side, shield walls were a very sophisticated tactic at the time, because they'd had a lot of time to, they're quite an old tactic and they'd been nailed down to a T. Shield walls are good. They were very effective against the archers, and obviously at the top of the hill meant they were very effective against the cavalry as well, initially. But once you break a shield wall, that's the end. The English were very experienced fighting this way, but also the English were very used to fighting against Vikings, who also fought in the same way, so they'd both just shield wall against shield wall. That's how battles happened. And so it was quite a different experience when you're fighting against the Normans, who rather than having a shield wall have a whole mix and range of troops, pick and mix troops. Normally, the Normans didn't use their cavalry against foot soldiers, but in this case they did, and it was quite effective once it'd been weakened. Yeah, William won because the shield wall broke. Let's see what else is here. Possibly the reason the shield wall broke, as I covered, running to get things. Generally that comes from also a lack of discipline within the army, because the housecarls were the trained, disciplined ones, whereas obviously person in the general third is just an everyday person who's been called up to serve in the army. Conscription, essentially. One bit of good tactics by William, actually, is that he managed to wait the whole summer with his massive army, and this is probably because he knew that at some point Harold would have to disband the third. It was a risky tactic, because obviously the storms could then come along, and then he'd have to wait till the next year comes along, and by that point, you should probably get on with claiming your throne, because Harold would have been like king for a whole year and a half by that point, and everyone would have been quite happy of just having Harold king. I mean, it seems that everyone was quite happy just having Harold king anyway, but William wasn't. Yeah. William also managed to transport horses across. Now, generally the tactic was for like Vikings and the Saxons, find horses once you get to the new place, and then use those horses, but the Normans had these like specially trained fighting horses and all that shenanigans, and so they're like, we gotta bring our horses with us, so they built these special flat-bottom boats that they were able to transport the horses along on, which was quite an impressive feat. And they also had a prefabricated castle, which I love that they brought across, and they used to adapt the Iron Age fort at Hastings. I mean, I like to think of it as just a flat-pack castle, like one from IKEA or something. Once William arrived, he was just like, went to his men, just like, destroy everything! So his men went through and they're just like burning things, raping women, all that kind of nasty stuff. A lot of looting as well. There's a lot of talk about how Harold could have arguments against Harold. Like, he could have waited in London, that was a poor decision for him to come down to Hastings. One important counter to that is that even though London was like a big walled city, if you notice the way that the Saxons and the Vikings fight, and that's basically who was fighting all the time, or like the Saxons against Saxons and Vikings against Vikings and Saxons against Vikings, they all this kind of shield wall against shield wall stuff, they never, even though they had walled cities, they never actually fought using the walled cities, and William was very experienced in sieges. So it would have been probably somewhat of a suicide mission for them to try and defend a city that they have no experience and no, in defending cities whatsoever, and then you've got someone who's very experienced in having a siege against a city. Probably not a good idea. So, I think Harold's decision to not wait in London was a good one. Also, William got very, very lucky with the timing of the Viking invasion. And that's the whole end of the yellow section. So we're a third of the way through. Some of these bits are faster than others, some of these bits are slower. Yeah. So the submission of the Earls is what then happened. So once William had done his, I won destruction, William then, he returned to Hastings after the battle. It's chill there for the rest of the day. He was hoping that the Saxons would come and... Wait a second. He was hoping that Saxon nobles would come and surrender to him. He thought, I won the battle now, killed your king, come and surrender to me. The Saxons were like, no, we still don't want a Norman as a king, even though you killed our king, especially because you killed our king. And what happened was the survivors of Harold's army went back to London. They met up with the troops who had got there after Harold had marched south. So when Harold had got to London, he'd waited a couple of days to get some more troops, but then he'd marched on reasonably quickly to meet William. So maybe waiting in London a day or so might have been a good idea for Harold, so he had a few more troops. But those who had got there after Harold had left met up with those who had fled after the Battle of Hastings. And then the Witan met and elected Edgar Atheling as the new king. So they're like, he's a Saxon, he seems like a good choice. I mean, he's a teenager, but we can sort stuff out, work it out. We don't want a Norman as our king. Yeah. William then was like, okay, so they're not coming to surrender to me. I need to get the south coast under control. And also by getting the south coast under control, he could get supplies over from Normandy, which meant, obviously, it's a lot easier once you've got a supply chain going, because you can be like, just keep on going. So he seized the royal treasury in Winchester. I was talking about Winchester earlier, so.
All roads lead to Winchester, especially from here.
The M27 leads to Winchester.
And we've just doxed ourselves, congratulations.
And the M27's reasonably long. So he seized the royal treasury in Winchester, which is important because, like, it's very difficult for Harold to reward his followers when his treasury has been seized, and it's also very easy for William to now reward his followers because he's seized the treasury and he's got loads of new treasure to go and give away to people. That meant he could, like, pay his troops, that kind of thing. Also, William then marched on to Dover as well, after having sent his troops to seize the royal treasury. So some of them, not all of them. The rest marched on to Dover. There they got very ill. That would have been a great time for the Saxons to come and attack, rather than waiting. Sorry guys, you could have done something. Edgar and that lot. William got really ill at Dover, and you could have stopped him, but you didn't. Got that justice for Harold. So once the supply route was secure, William continued his march. Obviously, got a bit better by that point. Again, destroying everything, like scorched earth policy, basically. So on the way, the inhabitants of towns were like, yeah, we'll surrender because we don't really want to be burnt down. London, however, didn't surrender. London was like, nope, still not having a Norman king. So William was like, can't really attack London directly because London is a big place with lots of walls. Maybe let's not attack it directly. So he marched round London. He went, what's that direction? West. I know geography, I should know this. He went west and marched around London, probably to go and try and block off supply, like, the north, so that reinforcement troops couldn't come down from the north to help protect London. But once he got to Berkhamsted, he was met by Edgar and the leading men of London, including Archbishop Eldred and Edwin and Morcar. And they were like, okay, maybe this is easier said than done. We'll have a Norman king. Didn't need to surrender, guys. You could have done it. So they submitted to William, swore oaths, handed over hostages. It's a real thing to hand over hostages in the Saxon period. In return, William said he would be a gracious lord. As you know, he didn't stick to that. William by this point had, in a way, he had quite an advantage because he was probably going to cut off troops from the north, and he had the treasury, and William was known for being very brutal. And I guess Edgar and that lot didn't really want to see their whole country destroyed and all the people in it killed. Unfortunately, submitting didn't help because the harrying of the north still happened, and I was working out, I think it's about 1/20 of the English population got killed in the harrying of the north. So yeah, that is, I think that's the end of, no, there's a little bit more. So the march is an important thing to talk about. The march is the border with Wales. Not entirely sure why they called it the march, but you could march along it. William wanted a reasonably trouble-free takeover, so he left the Saxons in the roles that they had. He also promised Edwin that he could marry his daughter. Never happened, and Edwin wasn't very happy about that when it eventually never happened. William rewarded his followers. He's like, gotta keep control of my followers, make sure they're still following me. So he sent gifts to the Pope and to supporters in Normandy, and he also set a very heavy yield tax so that he could pay his mercenaries, because obviously it's very expensive to hire a lot of troops. I mean, I've never tried hiring an army yet, but...
Not yet.
You know, when I set the tax heavy enough, I'll hire one. In the Anglo-Saxon period, 30 men was enough to count as an army.
Was it?
Yeah.
Wow. That's
So I might actually be able to hire an army.
Yeah. Really? 30?
30? Yeah.
Well, do you want to know how many likes we've got?
Oh.
32.
We have an army!
That's right, you've got the long, long time ago army.
Oh. Yeah, so also, William declared that all land in England belonged to him. Hell yeah! And that meant that he could just give out land willy-nilly. Oh, he's called William. Willy. Oh.
Step right into that one.
Yeah, so he could redistribute land as he liked. He also said that all those who had fought at Hastings had lost their right to lands. And obviously the Godwins had fought at Hastings, so that's basically the end of all of the power for the Godwins. Goodbye, Godwins. I was talking about this earlier, March. I said talking about the March and then didn't talk about the March. So March earldoms were set up, 3 of them, Hereford, Shrewsbury and Chester. They were...
Breaking news.
Door opened. It's a toilet door as well. Yeah, so March earldoms were different to other earldoms because they were smaller. So that meant that they were easier to control, and also meant that because the March earls also had special powers, because by having a smaller earldom, they weren't able to be as powerful as the king. March earls had special powers, so they had powers that normally only the king had, which was to create towns and establish markets and establish churches. But my sentence doesn't make sense. Establish churches and...
Oh, nothing.
Okay,
I'll tell you about it in a sec.
Churches and do this for this was... Oh, right, yeah. Now I understand why. Now my notes make sense. The reason for doing this was to help with colonization, because by having lots of people there, they could establish a place on the march. The sheriffs there worked for the Earl and not for the king, which again gives the special powers. The Earl had a lot more control over his little earldom. March earls didn't have to pay tax on their lands, which meant they had more money to help with defences on the march, and they could build castles as and when, and they didn't have to apply for a castle building permit, which the rest of the earls and earldoms did have to. There was a lot of castle building going on, so William built a lot of castles. England, before that, had basically no castles. All these castles that they built were motte and bailey castles, so those are the wooden ones with the motte and the bailey, like a big mound, and then a keep on top, and a wooden fence, that kind of thing. There's a nice diagram of it somewhere. I mean, I could probably get up the diagram here, actually. That's a motte and bailey castle. They were built at lots of strategic locations, and on the march they were used as a base to launch attacks into Wales from, because no one likes the Welsh, let's launch some attacks onto them. It's okay, I have a Welsh friend. And there was generally castles were a lot of power showing type things, so they used to dominate the territory, and they're a big symbol of power. Ooh, we're on to 2.2.
Oh, wow.
The Revolt of Edwin and Morcar. This is one I'd like to make a video on soon.
We've been streaming for about 80 minutes as well.
Oh,
my
God. I need to get through this fast. You can see why I couldn't do this for 2 topics.
Oh, yes, of course.
So Edwin and Morcar. That's an important revolt. I'd like to make a video on this soon. Mm-hmm. But it would be too late for you guys who are about to do your exams, unfortunately. So, it didn't happen. Right, it did happen. in spring. I was about to say it happened in spring 1067, but it didn't happen in spring 1067.
Worse, I thought you were going to say it happened in spring term.
Yeah, it happened in the spring term. Yeah, so in spring 1067, William's like, yeah, I'll go back to Normandy. And then he eventually returned in December. But by that point, when he returns, the Norman control of England was under threat. And then 1068, Edwin and Morcar, who had been in William's court, fled from William's court, and they went north and were joined by many others in a rebellion against William, protesting against William's injustice and tyranny. When William heard news of this, he went north with his forces, and he built castles as he went. So he built a castle in Warwick, he built one in Nottingham, because castle building's his thing. He must have built these castles pretty quickly. Just made eye contact with my brother and he just scampered up the stairs outside. Yeah, so William built these castles. Edwin and Morcar surrendered very, very quickly, which makes some people believe that perhaps this was like a test of William rather than an actual full-on attempt at a revolt.
Oh, sorry, just a chat question.
Oh.
Can we go over laws and similarities and differences between Anglo-Saxons and Normans?
Ooh.
Obviously not right now.
Yes. That will be... Everything in this textbook is getting covered. So the entire
everything.
thing. Yeah. I'm not doing all of the facts,
sorry.
Not all of the tiny little facts, but kind of everything that happened.
Everything, okay, cool. Now, I realise I've not really passed you any chat messages for
No, you haven't. Any other chat messages? That
not really any that I can show you right now, but there are some that I'll show you later.
Alright.
The chat mostly has been really, really good though. I'd like to say, yeah.
Good.
Really good. Special shout out to Music Gecko and Stabvest.
Yeah, Music Gecko deserves a special shout out anyway, because...
He does. He is quite
that gecko has been everywhere.
Yeah. And there's the occasional one that I'm having to...
remove.
I prefer the term purge.
Purge. Censor things.
Yeah, it's difficult though. I feel like not to jump in on your...
You don't want to destroy free speech.
Well, obviously, yes. I'm largely of the opinion that you can, probably won't finish that sentence. But, good guys. And not to leave anyone else out as well. You're all being very nice.
Oh, good job, children.
Yes, I agree with the gecko.
What?
The suspense, I'll show you later.
Oh. So much suspense. Anyway, so William built a load of castles. Once he built a castle in Warwick, he established control of Warwick. Once he'd established control of Warwick, York sent some hostages, because hostages galore. As soon as they heard about this. York sent hostages as soon as they heard Nottingham had fallen. Well, I can't follow my own sentences. And then soon the Northumbrian rebels also surrendered. Edgar Atheling fled back to Scotland, where Malcolm III took him in. Malcolm III is the same Malcolm that appears in Shakespeare's Macbeth. Fun fact.
Oh,
yeah.
Interesting.
That's why I like Malcolm, because he was a good guy in real life. Took in Edgar. The revolt fell quickly after the surrender of Edwin and Morcar, because they were quite important people leading it. William pardoned them, but kept them as guests in his court. And Scotland soon became the new centre of resistance. So, yeah, I mentioned earlier that 1068 seems like it could have been a test for William. And that leads us on to Edgar and the rebellions in the north, which are, again, an important thing. There's a lot of rebellions going on at this time, because a lot of people weren't very happy with the whole, king that's Norman. So, during the 1068 revolt, Gospatrick had betrayed King William. So Robert Cumin got made the new Earl of Northern Northumbria and replaced Gospatrick as the Earl of Northern Northumbria. Obviously, by this point, Northumbria is now no longer just Northumbria as one earldom. It's got a northern one. 1069, Cumin decided to take a force north and launch attacks on towns and villages, seemingly just for the hell of it. When he got to Durham, the bishop warned him that this probably wasn't a good idea, launching attacks. Turn around.
Your family is outside.
We just got a photograph from the side. There's a big, double, glass doors. We just got photographed. Yeah, so when Cumin got to Durham, the bishop warned him that his attacks were causing resentment.
We
just...
Well, you're being called as well as you're doing this.
Oh, God.
Lol. No.
Yep. So... Yeah, Cumin carried on anyway, and he was taken by a surprise by a band of Northumbrians who slaughtered them in the streets of Durham. Dun dun dun. Yeah, Cumin managed to escape, though, and he took refuge in the bishop's house, but the rebels were like, no, we're not letting him get away with him. And they set fire to the bishop's house. And so... just so much tapping on the windows. So once the bishop's house got set fire to, Cumin was obviously eventually forced out, and once he came out, he was killed by the Northumbrian rebels. Then in around February, there was an uprising in York where the governor and many of the Norman troops were killed. Edgar and his supporters came down from Scotland and joined these rebels. They launched an attack on the Norman sheriff at his garrison, and William then arrived quite quickly with a big army. He routed the rebels and then laid waste to York. Edgar escaped back to Scotland, and a new castle was rapidly built because, hell, castles! And William Fitzosborne, who's quite an important figure, as you probably know, he was made the Castellan, who's like the person in charge of the castle. And then William returned to Winchester for his Easter celebrations, because Winchester's where it's at. I got a good pasty shop next to the thing. Yeah, nice pasty shop in Winchester.
Cool.
You're over there, right next to the Buttercross.
Is this near the end of the section?
That's a good question.
Cool. Because I've got 2 questions.
It's quite near the end of the section.
Okay, cool. So Judar asks to do something to do with the third point. I don't know if that means more to you in terms of the exam structure.
Oh, right, the third point.
Yeah, the third point. I don't know if you know more.
Yeah, I know what...
Do you know what that means?
I know what he's on about.
Okay, it's not code. Good. For reference, I've done my GCSE a long time ago now.
Byron, yeah, is a very old man.
Basically, yeah.
I mean, he's actually a man.
Yeah, I am actually a man.
What's the rest of the question?
I think that was the question. It's an 8-mark question and the third point. Yeah.
Show me the question.
I'll show you the question. Where is it? It is here. Apologies for the dead air, everyone. And here. I wasn't sure exactly what that meant. But, I feel like this makes more sense to you. I'm just going to check more of the chat as well whilst we're going.
Something about, I don't understand what the question is there. I know what the third point is, but what's the question?
Cool, right. So, July, apologies. It looks like your question has been slightly lost. If you wouldn't mind saying it again, we'll try and answer it.
I'll get to the end of this section and we'll...
Cool.
Right, yep.
Back to reality.
Yes, so... Actually, that was, so in summer of 1069, King Sweyn of Denmark assembles a fleet, because the Danes have to get involved in everything, and that arrives on the English coast at the start of September. It raided up the east coast, that was their thing. Basically every time the Danes arrived, they raided up the east coast, and they met with Edgar's troops, who were down from Scotland again, in mid-September. This army, that was like a combo of both the Anglo-Saxons and the Danes, the Anglo-Danish army, they marched on York, got there on the 21st. When attempting to clear houses out the way of the defences, ready for the battle, the Normans accidentally set fire to the city. They... Gotta love the Normans. They, obviously then went out to meet the Anglo-Danish army outside the city because they'd set fire to it, and the Anglo-Danish army cut them to pieces. After their victory, the Danes sailed to the coast of Lincolnshire, which was difficult to access by land because there were lots of swamps there, so presumably that was so that the Danes could have like a stronghold, because the Danes were very, very good at sea-type stuff, so the Normans wouldn't have done such a good job against the sea. Against the Danes at sea, because they'd had to go around via the sea. The Saxon rebels scattered and began this whole thing where the Saxons would start rebelling in one area, and then William would arrive with his army, and they'd all scatter, and then another rebellion would appear in a different area, so sort of like guerrilla warfare, that type of thing, though that obviously wasn't a term at the time. So specifically at this point, news of rebellions in Shrewsbury and Chester, and also in Devon, popped up. William's solution to this whole thing was to pay off the Danes and begin the harrying of the north, which we're going to go into more detail in a moment, but there's one more rebellion to talk about, and that is Harold the Wake in Ely, where I have a video about this, and I speak way too fast in this video, but, you know, can't have it all right, so I'm going to find this video. Right, you should be able to hear me. It'll be a black screen. Where is it? Media source. Right. Harold the Wake in Ely. That's the wrong thing. That's the soundtrack. You probably want the video to go with it. There we go.
It's 1070. The Danes are back and at it again.
Is it metered yet?
The summer before, a fleet of Danes had sailed up to join the Anglo-Danish attack on York. However, this time, the Danish fleet is led by the King of Denmark himself, Sweyn II. 1071. Harold the Wake and the Rebellion at Ely. The Danish fleet sails to East Anglia and sets up on the Isle of Ely, in the middle of the Fens. The Fens are a marshy region, and the Isle of Ely itself, in 1070, is surrounded by water and swamp, making the area ideal for the Danes to defend. If William is to attack, he'll need the local knowledge of safe routes through the marsh, or he'll meet a sticky end. To make matters even better for the Danes, East Anglia is part of the Danelaw, so Sweyn is easily able to make alliances with the locals. One of these locals Sweyn teams up with is a local rebel leader called Harold the Wake. Harold is a local thane who'd been exiled under Edward the Confessor. During his time in exile, he'd fought as a mercenary in Flanders. However, upon his recent return, in 1069, he'd discovered that his lands had been seized and given to a Norman. At the same time, the Archbishop of Peterborough, not far from Ely, had been replaced by a Norman called Turold. Harold isn't too happy. In fact, he's been fighting a guerrilla war, one where small bands of his rebels attack the Normans by surprise, then immediately disappear back into the local population and scatter, meaning that the Normans can't retaliate. Concerned about the riches of Peterborough Abbey falling into the hands of the Normans, Harold convinces the Danes to raid the abbey with him. The raid is successful, particularly for the Danes, who sail off promptly back to Denmark with the treasure. Earl Morcar of Northumbria and his men then come down to support Harold's campaign. As William and his Normans advance, Harold and Morcar prepare to defend the Isle of Ely in a final standoff. It is thought that William probably bribed local monks to have them show him a safe passage through the marshes, and consequently, William is able to capture the isle. Morcar is captured and imprisoned for the rest of his life, whilst Harold manages to escape, never being heard of again. The defeat at Ely marks the end of the large-scale Anglo-Saxon rebellions, and thus William's rule is secured once again. 1071. Harold the Wake and the Rebellion at Ely. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and tell all your friends. I don't think I've shouted out my Twitter yet, so if you want updates on when videos are coming out and random insights into my thoughts, then go follow me on Twitter @alongtime.
Alright, we're back. And we've got a light. The light isn't quite right anymore, is it? Hey Byron, can you sort out the light for me?
Oh, it's the light wrong.
Slave.
Oh. Told you to stop calling me that in public. Right, is that better?
You're just blinding me now. Come have a look. I think it's better now. I hope. To be honest, I don't even remember what it was like to start with. Anyway, so we've covered, Harold the Wake and Ely. The Harrying of the North. Important thing to know about. Let's just catch myself up in the textbook. Discreetly done.
At this point, everyone involved is trying to trip you up.
Strip me up.
See, the spam comments are getting to my head. There's not been a lot, there's just been a few. It's been in good fun.
Good fun purging comments.
Good fun purging comments, yes.
Yes. So, Harrying of the North, William laid waste to a very large area which stretched from the River Humber to the River Tees, which is a long way if you go on Google Maps and look it up at some point. It's interesting. He also had similar destruction in other rebel areas, so parts of Staffordshire and parts of Shropshire. Thought as many as 100,000 people died, and if you remember, back in the very beginning, in the first video I played, when we were having those technical difficulties, the population of Anglo-Saxon England was only 2 million. So presumably the population would have grown slightly since then, but that's a very, very large proportion of the population that were killed during the Harrying of the North. They destroyed lots of crops, which meant that people starved. Shelters were destroyed, so people froze. William's troops also destroyed the seeds for next year's crops. So that basically just killed off the area because they couldn't then grow food for the next year. So that, the area was no good anymore. Thousands of refugees fled the region, and there were reports of cannibalism and people selling themselves into slavery for food. So it was pretty dire, yeah.
Crikey, that's... Yikes.
Yeah, about 20 years later, in the Domesday Book, it said that 60% of Yorkshire was still classified as waste and without livestock. So that meant there was no activity going on in the area that could be taxed. So yeah, pretty dire. There were also between 80 and 100,000 fewer people than in January 1066, according to the Domesday Book. Yeah, after the Harrying of the North, this is kind of a big turning point, because rather than trying to appease the Saxon lot that had been the Saxon aristocracy, William was like, no, we're just going to replace them. So he started replacing them. And that also is important because that leads us on to changes in land ownership. So, important things to note, by 1087, most land was held by Normans, including 1/5 of the land just as royal estates. Saxons often lost their land by forfeit land grabs and new earldoms being created. So you noticed throughout the time period, lots of earldoms remained roughly in the same place, but they often changed. So Wessex shrank. Harold Godwinson was technically Earl of Wessex, but he was also Earl of Herefordshire as well. And so they changed shape a lot, and new earldoms would be created. So there you can't say solidly that this is one area of land then goes to this person, because it changes a lot. After 1071, William consolidated more blocks of land, because previously what happened is when a Saxon had died and a Norman had taken over the land, that Norman might take over several bits of land in different areas of the country, whereas after 1071, William was like, this isn't very good for keeping control of things, so we'll make sure that even if they're inheriting the same amount of land, they inherit it in the same area of land. They inherit land in the same area of land. There were also lots of changes in the way land was held. So in Saxon time, what's known as tenure, which is the way land was held essentially, or land holding. There was a type of land called bookland, which was basically where a lord would hand out land to his followers, and then there'd be a little charter to show that the land belonged to the follower, and then that land could be sold, and his heir could inherit it. And there was also land done on leases, which is like a lease with a flat or that kind of thing. So it would be you'd pay and then you'd own that land for a period of time. So it might be like you own that land for 3 generations, would be how the lease would be done. Both types of land carried obligations, so like you'd have to pay tax and you'd have to send men to the Third. Whereas the Norman period, this changed. In the Norman period, technically there was only one landholder, the king. The king owned all of the land, but other people were kind of renting the land from the king. Saxon landholders would usually have to redeem their land, which means they'd have to pay William to get it back after William had taken over the country, which obviously wasn't very popular because they were like, this land is mine? Can I have it back without actually having to pay for it? Whereas the land that William granted to his followers didn't have to be redeemed. But if that person died without an heir, that land would then go back to William. And if they didn't die without an heir, there would be a large load of inheritance tax, essentially. And those acting against William could lose their land. It also gave way to the formation of a new... It just suddenly got darker.
No, I think this thing called the sun is coming down.
Ah. It just had looked like the screen suddenly got darker, even though the light's still as it was. Yeah, so this gave way to an important, new load of people, which are the tenants and chiefs. And they could reallocate land when Thanes died, and they could then make their followers heirs to that land, and they could also dispossess Thanes who acted against them. This meant that these Thanes had to essentially be obedient vassals, and a vassal is like someone who's serving a lord. That kind of thing. Ooh, here's a hole in my notes. Maintaining royal power. There we go. Ways William maintained royal power. He used the military, obviously. Feel like there's not that much that needs to be said about it. He also emphasised the fact that he was the legitimate successor to Edward the Confessor, even though we all know he wasn't. Yeah, so he'd attend royal ceremonies, that kind of thing, to show off the fact that it's my throne, yeah. And he was like, God chose me to defeat Harold. Nothing about Harold's bad luck, it was definitely God. And that was another way he'd be like, yeah, it's my throne, really my claim that the throne is the right one. So yeah, he'd attend a lot of royal ceremonies. He took control of the mint, which was the thing that made the coins, and the treasury remained at Winchester. And then with these new coins, he'd have a picture of himself on them, because why not have a picture of yourself? He also made a lot of journeys around England, just popping in to see people. He'd come to visit the local Earl or Thane to just reinforce his position. Well, it wouldn't have been a Thane by that point, more an under-tenant or tenant-in-chief. Changes in land ownership obviously helped him with consolidating power, and also he did a lot of very serious oath-taking. So you'd have these big oath-taking ceremonies where men would swear their loyalty to William. There was a very big one in 1086 when another great Viking invasion seemed to be imminent. They had a big ceremony at Salisbury, where every landholder of any kind of importance, whoever they were tenants of, came to swear their loyalty to the king. Probably hundreds of men, possibly thousands of men there. And that brings us on to the Revolt of the Earls, which is a whole section that I can do in one video. So, let's find the Revolt of the Earls. This is a kind of old video, actually. You can see that I have lower quality, pixel-wise, characters on this video.
I see.
Let's find it. Oh, it's going to be in my old folder. I have an old folder for that. Before I upgraded the quality of my characters, and a folder for since I've upgraded the quality of my characters. There we go. In here. The Revolt of the Earls. Here we go.
It's 1075. Things are heating up. King William is gradually being in strict power of his earls. Ralph de Gale, the Norman Earl of East Anglia, is not happy. Nor is his friend Roger de Bretel, Earl of Hereford, and the son of one of William's most loyal followers, William Fitzosborne. William had shrunk the earldom of Hereford and sent in his own sheriffs to control the Marcher earldoms. The two aren't happy, so they decide to take matters into their own hands. 1075. The Revolt of the Earls. In 1075, Ralph de Gale, Earl of East Anglia, married Emma, the sister of his co-conspirator, Roger de Bretel. At the feast there were many important figures, bishops, abbots, earls and magnates. One of these guests was particularly significant, Wulftheof, Earl of Northumbria, and the last surviving Saxon earl. Wulftheof was son of Earl Siward of Northumbria, the earl who had been replaced by Tostig Godwinson after his death in 1055. Wulftheof had only been allowed to remain earl after submitting to William. Moreover, Wulftheof had been part of the rebellions in the north, however was pardoned, again after submitting. It was at this wedding feast that Ralph and Roger decided to tell Wulftheof about their plans. It is likely they hoped getting Wulftheof on board would help win them the widespread support from the Anglo-Saxons which they needed. As well as gaining them the support of the Danes, Wulftheof had strong contacts with King Sweyn of Denmark. The plan was for them to overthrow William, dividing his kingdom into three, between them. They also took care to time the planned revolt with when William was away in Normandy, leaving Archbishop Lanfranc as regent. The plan was underway. However, it never really did kick off. First of all, Wulftheof changed his mind, deciding better than to take part in the revolt. He informed Lanfranc of the plans. In response, Lanfranc sent out men to see what was happening in the earldoms of Hereford and East Anglia. Upon their return, the men reported that the rebels were strengthening the defences of their castles and building up their troops, ready for a combined attack. Lanfranc wrote letters to Roger de Bretel, trying to dissuade him from rebellion, and reminding him of his own father's loyalty to William, though these letters had no effect. So Lanfranc changed his strategy, instead choosing to use excommunication, the act of expelling someone from the church, meaning they couldn't confess their sins before they die, and will be doomed to burn in hell. An effective tactic for a religious nation. Meanwhile, preparations were being made elsewhere to counter the revolt. In the west, Bishop Wulfstan of Worcester and the Abbot of Evesham used their troops to prevent Roger from crossing the River Severn, trapping him in Herefordshire. In the east, Anglo-Saxons and Normans joined together in an effort to stop Ralph breaking out of his earldom in East Anglia. The rebellion wasn't exactly going well. They had failed to get the widespread Anglo-Saxon support they needed, and as part of the plan, they'd also contacted the Danes, who put together an impressive fleet, 200 ships, led by Canute, the son of King Sweyn, and Earl Hakon. They even had the support of Brittany and France, Normandy's main rivals, who wanted to weaken Normandy. However, there was a catch. These Danish ships arrived too late. William had already returned to the country. The Danish fleet could have stretched Norman defences beyond their limits. However, as stated in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, the two leaders, Canute and Earl Hakon, dared not join battle with William himself. Instead, the Danish fleet chose not to invade. They raided up the east coast, and, as usual, ransacked York Cathedral before returning home again. After the defeat of the revolt, Ralph managed to escape to Brittany, whilst his wife, Emma, chose to hold out in Norwich Castle until she could make a deal which guaranteed her, and their followers, a safe passage back to Brittany. Wulftheof fled abroad. However, William tricked him into thinking he would be forgiven if he returned. Upon his return, he was imprisoned, and William must have totally run out of patience with Wulftheof, as in May 1076, he was executed in Winchester. Roger was also captured, and imprisoned for life. William then travelled back to Normandy, attacking Ralph's castle at Dole. He faced strong resistance, and troops sent to aid Brittany from France, so was forced to retreat. That was the end of the revolt. However, it taught William a valuable lesson or two. First of all, he realised he had to be careful of his own earls. Ambition and resentment had been at the heart of the revolt. The joining of Anglo-Saxons with Normans in preventing the revolt, such as Bishop Wulfstan, suggests some Anglo-Saxons now supported William's rule, and William now stamped down harder on any rebellions which arose, especially if they involved links to Denmark. 1075. The Revolt of the Earls. Thanks for watching. I'm going to say the same thing again. Everyone always does. But if you'd like to subscribe, I'd really appreciate it.
Back.
You're back.
Yeah. Right. We're on to the purple bit now. Ooh.
It's upside down.
Yeah, I know it's upside down.
Good. I wasn't sure.
I do know which way is up. There'd be more twisting and turning if I hadn't.
That is true.
So, the feudal system is an important thing to talk about. Got a nice diagram of the feudal. I just can't operate. Don't have enough USB ports to have a mouse at the moment, so I'm using the trackpad, and I'm a very mousy heavy person.
We'll just use
mouse heavy person. Oh, I don't do that kind of advanced stuff. So here, let's line it up. We have a nice diagram of. Let's figure out how I'll do it. The feudal system. Now, as you can see, I don't have the coordination for this.
Should I point to it? Would that be easier?
Yeah, do the pointing.
Point
just follow the arrows. So okay, cool. William I, he grants land to his tenants-in-chief and does things like law. You're going too fast. Law and that kind of providing services, supposedly. Mm-hmm. And then his tenants-in-chief, who were like the aristocrats. So someone who's a tenant-in-chief wouldn't necessarily have the tenant-in-chief as their main title. Like a bishop is a type of tenant-in-chief. Oh, there's a notification coming up here. There we go.
Do I have to keep my hand up the whole time?
Well, we point to the next thing now. So the tenants-in-chief grant privileges and land to the under-tenants, who then provide land to be worked to the peasants. Point down again. Peasants, most of them were like tied to a lord, so churls, you didn't really have many of them at stage. Now point to the other end. So like over here.
Oh right, okay.
Wait, no. Well, over here. This bit.
Right. New hand.
Yeah, so the peasants, in return, they worked the land and provided like military service. The under-tenants, who were often like knights, that kind of thing, they would then provide proper military service for the tenants-in-chief. You're pointing at the wrong end again now.
Sorry.
Yes.
I didn't realise it was on both sides.
Yeah, it's got arrows going different directions.
My apologies.
And then the point to the next one above. And then
this is so good.
And then the tenants-in-chief would then provide like knight service and like tax and that kind of thing to William I. So point to the top again. We got this. Done. That's where I put the thumbs up. Yep, so tenants-in-chief are very important people. Knights are also important. They did a lot like guarding the lord's property, riding out to combat threat, provided 40 days knight service. Everything's 40 days. That would be directly for the king. And they were like the top dog military unit. And they were essentially the new thanes. So under the feudal... Oh. I don't see it. Yeah, tenants-in-chief, very important. A lot of stuff about fighting, that kind of thing. Overseeing things. They also had quite some political significance. Yeah, my notes are starting to make less sense here. As in they're dying out. So I'm just trying to match up where these notes have actually come from on the textbook. Nature of feudalism. Yeah, it must be this here. Ah, I see where these come from. So overall landholding was simplified. Reliefs were often being paid on land, so that's your money to like get your land back. Homage is an important thing. So when William granted land to a tenant-in-chief, an important ceremony of homage took place. The Baron would kneel before the king and do this thing where he puts his hands in his laps. He's like, I become your man, blah 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 blah, and promise to remain faithful. And then that's a big significant thing. And the tenants-in-chief would then carry... You're eating a sugar cube. The tenants-in-chief would then carry out similar ceremonies with their tenants. You've been given away. Yep, they'd also... Labour service was a thing, so that would be where working on a lord's land, and then that would be you'd work on the lord's land in return for use of that land for your own purposes. This would be what the peasants would do. That would be what most of the peasants, most of the country would be peasants and would be doing labour service. Forfeiture is another important thing. So if you ever didn't provide a service like military service or land service, then you could have to forfeit your land or pay a fine. Also, if you go against William, he's not happy about that. He'll get rid of your land for you. Yeah, to drink. Needed to cough. Enjoy that. So yeah, the church is another very important thing to talk about. My watch just beeped. As you expect, historical society, the church is very, very important. Bishops and abbots were very literate and well educated, so they'd often be advisors to the king, and they'd have both personally and then in the royal council. They'd often have a role in developing laws and advising the king on legal matters. Church clerks issued king's writs and kept charge of the royal seal. Many bishops would have started their careers as church clerks, and the king would then reward their service with promotions. And most senior church leaders, so the archbishops, sometimes acted as king's representative in negotiations. And also Archbishop Lanfranc, who we'll get onto in a moment, became William's regent, so he's the dude governing the country when William's away, when William was in Normandy. So in the Saxon period, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who's the top dog archbishop, was a guy called Stigand, and he was replaced by Lanfranc in the Norman period. Now, there's quite a difference between the two. Lanfranc didn't really approve of the way Stigand had done things. So Stigand had been a close ally of Earl Godwin, and Earl Godwin had been the one who'd got him to be archbishop against Edward's wishes. Edward the Confessor, that is. Lanfranc's but the king should be appointing the archbishop because God. A great reasoning. And Stigand had not actually held that much in the way of control over his archbishops or bishop outside his area, whereas Lanfranc had controlled most of the country. He'd had this kind of centralised top-down system for controlling bishops, etc. So yeah, Lanfranc revived church councils and used them to push through his reforms. Stigand was also typical of Anglo-Saxon archbishops and bishops in that he was a pluralist, so he was a bishop for multiple areas. So he was bishop for Canterbury and for Winchester. The reason for this is because the more diocese you have, the more money you get, because it comes with land. So more land and money, and that meant that Stigand was also accused of simony, which is the practice of taking money in exchange for granting church jobs. That didn't mean that he was I didn't say that sentence very well. He was also accused of simony. or simony. I don't really know how to pronounce that. We'll just blaze through it. Lanfranc again is like, this isn't very moral, don't like Stigand. So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, or just now, Lanfranc did some big reforms to the church. They might come up on a question. Lanfranc's reforms to the church seem to appear everywhere. So Lanfranc, he didn't like Stigand. He thought that the Saxons hadn't been spiritual churchmen at all. And especially like the way parish priests had like lived among the community and got married and had families, like that's not very moral, Lanfranc thought. He wanted his priests to be separate from society, so he passed council laws banning marriage for the clergy and making celibacy, which is like where you don't have any kind of sexual relations, compulsory for the priests. You know, poor priests. He also, in 1076, a church council passed Lanfranc's reform that court cases involving the clergy, so priests and other ministers, church people basically, shouldn't be tried in 100 courts, but they should be heard in a special church-only bishop's court. Trial by ordeal came under the church's control. If you did crime and punishment, you know all about that. Because trial by ordeal meant that God was judging it, and so, therefore, surely the church should oversee trial by ordeal. This was, gave the church like a separate place in the legal system, made it special. Saxon cathedrals in isolated rural locations were knocked down, which is very disappointing because I quite like the idea of just being walking through the countryside and just casually seeing a cathedral.
Oh yeah, of course. Most simple.
Yep. And then the cathedrals are then rebuilt in strategically important market towns, so like Chichester and Salisbury. It's got a lot listed there. I was just talking about Salisbury, just makes me think of the Russian spies. Come to see the cathedral, the world famous cathedral, moved by the Normans. That meant that there was like a bishop in an important location to restore the control, because control is everything. Archdeacons became more and more common. They were like below bishops in the church hierarchy, but like the next thing below them. Yeah, so they're above parish priests, and that adds more to like the hierarchy and makes it easier to keep a tight control on things. Lanfranc also introduced changes to church ritual and brought with him from Normandy his personal collection of legal documents, which provided guidelines for understanding laws and developing new ones. He also promoted like monastic, as in like monasteries, like values, so like spiritual life, study and prayer, and getting rid of corruption. So I guess he's moral in that sense, but you know, control. Just getting my opinion on these characters now. So there was a lot of normalisation going on. I love that word in the church. There was a lot of architectural change, so they didn't really like the way that, and also change of leaders. So there was only, by 1070, or after 1070, there was only one remaining Anglo-Saxon bishop, who got a mention earlier in the Revolt of the Earls video, and that's Wulfstan of Worcester. Yeah. So lots of because you now had Norman bishops, messages about the king were now, messages from God were now very, very, like, oh, the Normans are great. Yeah, God says the Normans love us. Everyone loves the Normans are the right people. They're the best. Also, the church is a very major landholder. They owned a quarter of the land. So that gave more Norman control of the land and general Lanfranc's controls. Lanfranc's reform brought about a lot more control. Also, when a bishop died, the king appointed his successor, and the king also received revenues from that church until church land until the new bishop was appointed. And William also controlled communication between church leaders and the Pope in Rome, so he wouldn't let them attempt by the Pope to convince the Norman church leaders that they should obey the Pope instead of him. So even though technically the Pope was the head of the church, William was like, yeah, he's the head of the church, but you have to go through me to get to him. There was a lot of change. We've got a kind of summary thing going on here. Talking about general change. I feel like we've covered most of this. Change, continuity. Yeah, that's all pretty much covered. 3.2. I think we're 2 sections away from the end now. We're getting there. There have been a lot of changes to government, so Norman government again used the Hyde for working out tax obligations, and they kept the Shire and the Hundred as like measurements of land. William seems to have maintained the Witan or a royal council of some sort, and when Norman England was facing the threat of Danish invasion in 1085, he gathered all the landholders in a big meeting, which appeared to be some kind of big Witan meeting, or a large scale version of the Witan. And the Norman economy used the Anglo-Saxon system of silver pennies. And the treasury remained in the same place. So there's quite a lot of continuity there. Yeah, so the role of earls reduced, which is an important thing to note. So William was able to reduce the power of the earls significantly. Once his most loyal followers had started being replaced, William made the earldoms, as in once his most loyal followers had died, rather than just bye-bye, he would make the earldoms smaller and more compact, and some were phased out altogether. So Wessex and Mercia stopped being earldoms. Earls still had an important military role, and on the march they were still very, very important. But they were now tenants-in-chief, so they were much more under control of
much more under control.
Under the control of William. So the role of regents is another important thing to talk about. So where William now had 2 countries and they were on the other side of the channel, he had to flick between the 2. So at some point there was always a regent running one country out of the 2. So during 1075, Lanfranc had been William's regent. William only used his most trusted followers. Lanfranc had been in regular contact with the king in Normandy and assured him constantly that everything was under control. However, William would, if he heard about any kind of trouble, he'd be like, whoosh, I'm back. In Normandy, he'd often leave his wife Matilda as the regent. His first 2 regents, Odo of Bayeux and William Fitzosborne, they had not done a very good job at being regent, hence he didn't use them again, because they'd been, let's make some land grabs, and that hadn't done a very good job for keeping things settled in England. The office of the sheriff and the Demesne. I always read that.
Right, let's see. Now, I did work it out the other day, because, what is it? The first player, not to get to computer gaming for you.
Okay.
There's a computer game called Crusader Kings, which is about, it's about this time period, and everyone's got bloody... Now, how is it spelled? Is it Denesme or Oh, wait, no, it's Domain.
Domain?
Domain, yeah.
Oh, that makes a lot more sense.
Yes.
That explains the word... okay, yeah. Right, everything's just clicked into head.
I was also playing a Sigil over the weekend, and there's a level called Baphomet's Domain, I think. So.
Okay, right. I know what I'm doing now.
Sorry, I don't tend to do that, by the way.
So, after the Norman conquest, the sheriff's 2 main roles, which were being the king's representative and collecting taxes, and also administering justice, they remained quite similar. However, William changed who the shire reeves, or now sheriffs, were. Though some of them stayed the same. They were also almost all Normans by 1071. So you can see a common pattern here. By 1070, 1071, pretty much everyone of any kind of importance was a Norman. Some Anglo-Saxon sheriffs joined rebellions against Norman rule, so they got replaced. There was, by this point, quite a lot of resentment against sheriffs because of some of the changes. So sheriffs were now entitled to a share of the revenues that they collected. They also then kept the money that was paid in fines to shire courts, and possibly some of the yield tax that they collected for the king was also theirs. That meant that sheriffs could make quite a lot of money for themselves if they wanted to squeeze the locals. So obviously they did squeeze the locals. They also paid a set sum of money to the king for the right to collect revenues from the king's estate. The sheriffs were able to keep any profits that they made over that, so that encouraged the sheriffs to extract as much as possible from the estates. So again, charging the locals lots, not going to make you very popular. They were also at the forefront of quite a lot of land grabs, so again, lots of resentment. They weren't really helping themselves. And then another thing that didn't make the Normans very popular was the forest laws. So the royal forest became a thing. And so, essentially, there were areas of the country, so the New Forest is a good example, where William was like, I want some hunting grounds here, because William liked hunting. So he kicked out all of the people. I think there were like 40 villages or something in the New Forest that all got destroyed so that he could have a hunting ground there.
Really?
Yeah. And that also, then poaching became a crime from that point. That's more crime and punishment type stuff.
I hear they've got an exam about that.
Yeah, they already had an exam about that.
Oh, they've had it?
Yeah, that was on Monday.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
You can tell I'm not in tune with the
Paper
GCSE.
2.
This is paper 2, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Paper 1 was crime and punishment.
I guess it would make sense.
Or another topic if you did another topic.
Oh yeah, of course. Not every centre does the same thing.
Yeah. The introduction of the forest is just bashed a glass. Significant.
Solidarity.
It was that glass I bashed with my one. It's significant because it showed the power of the king was like above everyone else, and it also like extending the forest beyond his own domain. Did I say that right? Not only increased the amount of land that the king controlled directly, it also is the equivalent to like the land grabs that his sheriffs had done, so not very popular. There were also very, very harsh punishments for breaking the forest laws. Say the contemporary sources say that those who unlawfully killed William's deer were to be blinded. And obviously these are people who'd been kicked out of their homes and like the places that they had used to get their food, like hunt, that kind of thing, so that they could have food. He was now like, oh, I'm hunting it for sport. You can't have that food that you were going to have. The Doomsday Book, that's another important thing that we want to talk about. So, Christmas 1085, following discussions with his advisors, William ordered a survey of England. The men who were sent to investigate the land holdings of each shire were who held what land, what taxes they owned. Then the results were written up in 1086 in the Doomsday Book. Spelt Domesday, remember that. So there was like a financial significance to it because many of William's tenants-in-chiefs got special deals that meant they didn't have to pay yield tax on some of their land. It's possible that William had a plan to reverse some of these privileges as a way of extracting more money from his tenants. And there were heavy yield taxes in 1084 and 1086. The king received a lot of revenue from charging reliefs and also managing the estates of heirs who were too young to inherit. So the way the Doomsday Book was organised meant that he could like easily see where there was a good opportunity to make money, even though he was really, really rich already. So don't know what he was planning to do with that money. Also had a legal significance because it gave everyone a chance to say who they thought owned what land, so it was a good way to settle land disputes. And it had military significance because it was a good way to in 1085, when the threat of Viking invasion was there, it was used to help kind of discuss and look at potential ways to combat that, and you could see who you could draft in to help. Oh, 3.3. I think this is the last.
Is this it?
Last. Oh no, there's a 3.4. Oh. But it's like 2 pages or 3.
I don't know why I'm sighing. I'm enjoying this. Natural response. I'm so sorry. And I think the chat's enjoying it too.
All right, that's good. Norman Aris's culture now, which is probably, these last couple of things are less likely to come up, but they're good to know, because if they do come up, most people won't necessarily know about them, is the impression I get. Or at least that was the case last year. So, Norman aristocratic culture in England was demonstrating wealth and power and superiority over the English. So the Normans would build big buildings, whereas the Anglo-Saxon aristocrats would have shown off through rich clothes and jewellery and having lavish gifts for family members. The Normans were we're going to build big things to make ourselves look powerful. Within 50 years of 1066, every English cathedral, every church, and most of the abbeys had been knocked down and rebuilt in a Norman style. So it's quite rare to find a Saxon church, or any church. That didn't make any sense. Norman aristocrats, who paid for this building work, were very much interested in making things bigger and better. Winchester Cathedral, Winchester just keeps coming up, was the longest in Europe.
You're lucky I'm not humming the song.
Westminster Great Hall was the largest in Europe. William's White Tower, the Tower of London, was the biggest stone keep in Europe. Canterbury Priory had the largest stained glass windows in Europe. What a great boast. Yeah, basically the Normans liked showing off. The Normans also brought with them the culture of chivalry, so that's idealised the knight and created a whole set of moral guidelines to accompany the business of hacking to pieces your enemies. So an example of chivalry in action is the way that William treated his captured enemies. While the Anglo-Saxons would have killed him, William put them in prison. It says here that he was merciful. I'm not sure he was, but you can draw your own conclusions. Yeah, Harrying of the North, merciful. There's a lot of Christian culture as well. Obviously, there's a lot of Christian culture in the history of Europe anyway. The Normans were very religious, more so than the Saxons. All those who fought against the English at Hastings, for example, were ordered to atone for their sins. A year of penance for each man killed, 40 days penance for each man wounded. If they weren't sure how many English they had killed, they should build a church. That makes everything alright. Yeah, so build a church and everything bad you've done is good. Yeah, so they thought, we do this, we pray, hopefully we'll avoid hell. Attitudes to the English were kind of key. The Norman clergy just straight up threw out quite a lot of the old Anglo-Saxon saints' relics. They didn't think they were sacred at all. And they'd destroy the few tombs of former abbots and monasteries, calling them yokels and idiots. Yeah, basically they had no respect for the English. So it's just saying, it was an insult to even be called English, and a 12th century Norman is supposed to have called going to the toilet doing an English. They really didn't like us. And language is another thing. William tried to learn English so that he could understand land claims better, but he had to give up because he had all other things for his time. When Lanfranc was appointed Archbishop in 1070, he couldn't speak English. So written English rapidly disappeared by the mid-12th century. And it was completely replaced by Latin for legal documents, including writs and church documents, and while the aristocracy talked to each other in French, the English became a vernacular language. Vernacular.
No, I don't know if this is covered in the book, but as a sort of language boy, I've got some fun.
Our
facts.
resident language expert.
Language boy and sort of polyglot. So Norman French, which is what they spoke, sort of eventually combined with English and sort of produced what we have now, where we have sort of a lot of French words. I think something like almost, I think it's over a fifth of all English words are of French origin. Obviously, the grammar's very different. But that's why there's that similarity, and yeah, that's it. Oh, and Latin was still used in courts, or Latin words were still used in courts until the late 90s.
Ooh.
Yeah. Courts weren't completely in Latin, but...
they're still there.
Yeah, Tony Blair made it illegal, I think, in 98, 99, to use any Latin terms in court. Sorry.
Don't use your Latin. It's illegal.
I completely threw you off unprompted.
Yeah, so like basically English was the language of the commoners. And like there were a few places where the English language is still being written. Obviously at this stage English is Old English.
Yeah.
So like you wouldn't understand it. There are some...
No, it's more like modern day Danish and Norwegian.
I have a great book somewhere down here called...
I think there's a load of Old English in the textbook. And obviously, if you look up like the text for Beowulf or something like that, with that translation,
my boy, learn Old English with Leofine.
Oh wow!
Has some interesting.
Have you heard about what's it called, Anglish?
Anglish, no.
Yeah, well, it's this thing I think.
I feel like we're going on a tangent here. See, it translates. You see the strange characters. You can see here the difference between.
Oh yeah, some of those characters are actually still used in.
You see them about sometimes.
Yeah, Icelandic uses the sound.
That's like the kind of Latinized version of those characters. Before that, they used runes.
Yes.
Yeah, anyway, slight tangent. So, yeah. Oh, the career and significance of Bishop Odo. Odo was William's half-brother. They had the same mum, a woman called Herleva. Probably not pronounced like that. In 1049, William made Odo the Bishop of Bayeux, even though his reputation was very poor. Odo was a major supporter of William's invasion, and he contributed 100 fleets to the ships, 100 ships to the fleet, that way round.
To be honest, after what you told me earlier about armies, I thought it was going to be 100 people.
Probably. That's just the Saxons. Yeah, and William rewarded him with the Earldom of Kent, which Leofine Godwinson had lost, so he replaced Leofine. The book's Learn Old English with Leofine as well. Yeah, he also gained control of like quite a lot of other things. Doomsday Book records him as holding land in 22 counties. Yeah, a lot of land. Or at least a lot of small bits of land. He was co-regent during William's first absence in 1067. But like he really wasn't very popular during this. Did a lot of castle building. As it says, the Doomsday Book shows him as settling land disputes himself, and Odoric, whoever that is, he's a Norman chronicler, describes him as dreaded by Englishmen everywhere, and able to dispense justice like a second king. There were a lot of complaints against Odo for illegally seizing land, including church land in Canterbury. In the end, it was Lanfranc who took these church complaints about Odo to William, and there was a 3-day inquiry in 1076, and they made Odo hand back the land. In 1079, William sent Odo to Northumberland, following attacks from Scotland and the murder of the Bishop of Durham. Odo laid waste to the region. He also supposedly pillaged a cathedral, pillaged cathedral treasures, and robbed and extorted anyone he could. So again, not making himself very popular. Then in 1082, Odo fell out of favour with William and was imprisoned.
Oh no.
No one quite knows why he fell out of favour, he just did. I mean, he should have fallen out of favour sooner. He was released in 1087, after William was on his deathbed, and was convinced by Robert of Mortain, or Mortain, probably, Odo's brother, to pardon Odo. William had freed other prisoners at this time, like Morcar and Wulfnoth being Harold Godwinson's brother, if you remember back that far. But he'd done it without any such persuasion, whereas he needed persuading for Odo. So he seriously didn't like Odo. Then in 1088, Odo led many barons in a revolt against William II, so that's King William's son, who took over after William died in 1087. That willingness to just act against the king shows his ambition for power. We're on the very last section now. The character and personality of William I. Does it really matter about the character of him? He survived several assassination attempts by rivals as he grew up. Cool.
Metal.
It's basically saying here that he was quite stern, brutal, experienced by the time it got to the Battle of Hastings. He was a religious king and a devoted husband. He was very religious, although he was interested in what the church could do for him. He also promoted church reform with Lanfranc and founded abbeys. He recognised that life had been brutal and is supposed to have repented on his deathbed.
Bit late.
Yeah, could have done with just not doing it in the first place. So William had taken the English throne by force, but he was always very concerned that he wanted to be accepted as the legitimate heir of Edward the Confessor, and he wanted to be a legitimate king, but that's difficult when you're not the legitimate king.
Scandalous.
And he was very devoted to his wife. When she died in 1083, he's said to have wept for days.
So at least he was nice about someone.
Yeah, he was nice to someone. His relationship with his son, Robert, was a bit tricky.
Phrasing.
So they had a lot of children, and Robert was the oldest one, who was born around 1051. And he was nicknamed Robert Curthose, which means short stockings, or like dumpy legs, it says here, which is thought to have been a mocking nickname given to him by his dad. As you learn later on, if you already know, he wasn't really one with a sense of humour. Although Robert was a good warrior, William didn't think he was ready to take control of Normandy, which was facing threats from its neighbours in the 1070s. So tension flared between them. In 1077, following a prank in which his younger brothers, so Robert's younger brothers, William and Henry, dumped water on his head, Robert started a real fight with his brothers that their father had to break up, so King William had to break the fight up. And angry that his dad had not punished the two younger brothers sufficiently, Robert and his men tried to take control of Rowan Castle, and then fled from William, who wanted them arrested.
When the ice bucket challenge goes wrong.
Exactly. After William led troops against Robert and his men at Remoulade, that's how we're pronouncing it, Robert fled to Flanders, and then King Philip of France, who was William's enemy, installed Robert in a castle on Normandy's borders, from which Robert repeatedly launched raids, forcing William to raise an army against him. Matilda, unknown to William, had been sending money to her son behind William's back. Proper, family beef going on here. When William found out, he was furious, although Matilda explained herself by saying that she would give her life for her children. Aww.
Did she do that?
No.
Alright.
She just died, anyway. Separately. At a battle in 1079, Robert and William fought against each other. Robert knocked William off his horse and wounded him. With William defenceless on the ground, Robert gave his father his own horse and ordered him to retreat from the battle. This was a huge humiliation for William, obviously, because, being defeated by your son, can't have that happen. Matilda organised a reconciliation between William and Robert at Easter 1080, and William restored Robert as his chosen heir for Normandy. All of that because of a gone wrong ice bucket challenge, essentially.
Well, the big thing to start off is tiny little snowball.
2 and a bit pages to cover.
Oh, wow.
William's death and disputed succession. There were a lot of disputed successions.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know the topic that well. Is Stephen and Matilda relevant? Or does that come up?
I think so.
Cool. I wasn't sure if that was later.
Don't
let me throw you off if I'm wrong.
Yeah, so William's death and disputed succession. July 1087, William led a raid into France, burning down the castle and the town of Monts. We're calling Manteses.
Oh, where's that, sir?
Here.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, we're cool. By this point in his life, William had grown very fat, kind of like Henry VIII.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Getting fat as you get old. Yes. And when his horse stumbled, he was thrown heavily against the saddle because it's so heavy, and that caused internal injuries. He then returned in great pain to Rouen, and it was soon clear that he was not going to survive this. He suffered for many weeks before finally on the 9th of September he died. The moment he died, panic broke out. His barons rode away to secure their castles against attack, whilst the servants stole everything they could, including furniture, leaving his corpse stripped of clothes on the floor. I wouldn't like to be the one stripping his clothes.
No!
And that's the point where I'd leave it.
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be other silks.
I suppose you could probably make quite a profit being like, these are the pants of William the First. Yeah.
What a sale on eBay.
Because of his drawn-out death, William had time to give instructions about what was going to happen over succession. So William decided that Robert should succeed to the dukedom, despite all the trouble between them. And also, back in 1066, all of the Norman barons had sworn their allegiance to Robert as William's heir. William put his trust in these oaths of allegiance. William, however, wanted his favourite son, not that he should have favourites, William Rufus, to be the King of England. But he was at the full repentance of any violent way he gained the crown. He said he would let God choose the next King of England. So basically, that meant that William and Robert fought each other for the crown. So really, William Rufus led for England before his father's death. Rufus means red in Latin, probably because William had red hair or red cheeks. Something red. He also has a stone on the spot he died. It's very underwhelming. There's a good pub nearby.
Is that how we rank all of the dead monarchs?
Yeah, they do.
Quality of the nearby pub.
A good steak pie. Well, except I can't have that anymore because I'm vegetarian these days.
I hear the Richard III car park pub's said to be quite good.
Oh, lots of good pubs near old dead kings.
Yeah, I think it's obviously conspiracy.
Yeah, so
Canterbury Cathedral's just actually a massive bar. I think that's where the royals are buried now, I don't know.
Yeah. Lanfranc supported William's claim to the throne, and he was crowned as... Oh yeah, he took with him a letter to Lanfranc from his father recommending him as king, and then Lanfranc supported this claim to the throne. So he was crowned William II in September 1087 at Westminster. That shows that Lanfranc obviously had quite a lot of power in England, because he was basically the only person who was, rather than having a wit and decide, it was just like, Lanfranc gets to choose. William II faced quite a lot of opposition to his rule, because Robert Curthose, his older brother, wanted to have England as well as Normandy, and according to Norman custom, the eldest son would inherit all of his father's estates. So there were also good reasons why important Normans would also have preferred for one lord for both Normandy and England. Basically, because if you had land in both places, you wouldn't really want to have a land in a place where one's like they're both fighting against each other. In 1087, Bishop Odo had been freed from prison. In 1088, he led a rebellion against William II. Not a good idea, releasing him from prison. This was in support of Robert's claim to the throne to be King of England. Yes, so Odo's brother, Robert of Morton, had joined Odo in revolt, and the brothers controlled large areas of the south of England, including some heavily fortified castles. Other rebellions broke out in 1088 alongside the main revolt, so there were small rebellions by Roger Bigod in Norwich and Sheffield, Leicester, just generally a few smaller rebellions out there. And there are also some medium-sized rebellions, so like the March Earls like Roger de Montgomery and Roger de Lacy. Yeah. Oh well, who cares about it? And they were put down by a force assembled by Bishop Wulfstan, who was like, I mean, he was basically a Norman, even though he was English.
It was Normanised.
Yep. So, surprisingly, quite a lot of the English population were actually against Odo's rebellion. Well, not really surprisingly, because they hated Odo more than they hated William II. Odo and Robert of Morton, different Robert, took refuge in Pevensey Castle. William Rufus besieged the castle for 6 weeks. He used local third troops to attack the castle and prevented any supplies from reaching the rebels. His tactics worked, and both his uncles, though Odo had escaped to Rochester and captured both his uncles, but Odo escaped to a different castle. Odo held out at this new castle, hoping that Robert Curthose would come to support him. Help never arrived, so he was eventually forced to surrender as the castle ran out of food and was struck by disease. Odo was stripped of all his English lands and titles and was exiled. William was very popular after the defeat of Odo because no one liked Odo, and he made many promises to his English subjects, like lower tax, end to the forest, and the restoration of the laws of Edward the Confessor. The list of promised concessions is clearly what the English population had resented most about Norman rule. Unfortunately, they didn't happen.
No.
The end.
What, is that the whole thing?
That's the whole thing. That's the whole topic. Take a bow, textbook.
Yes, absolutely. I was just going to say, I did a bit of Googling on the name Odo. Yeah. It's related to Otto, the Germanic name.
Yeah.
Which I guess makes perfect sense, but I was like, Odo, that's a weird name.
Yep.
Oh no.
Any questions?
Yes, actually.
There was one from Jidar that we didn't answer earlier.
Yeah, was that the third point?
Yeah, the third point one.
Yeah, Jidar's still here, so if you could post that again, that'd be fantastic. I'm just going to see if there's any more questions. I should have been collating this earlier. I've just been, chatting with your fans. Let's see, is there any good questions? Actually, time probably now to post some questions. I don't know how long we're going to stay on for post.
I don't know, depends how many questions there are.
Currently, there's not very many. Is American West in the paper tomorrow?
Yes, American West is in the paper tomorrow, so
cool.
That is the first section of the paper, and then the Saxons are the second section.
Exam techniques and pacing.
Exam techniques and pacing. I did actually do a video, generally like an overview video, which I released yesterday. Which I
was going to say, yeah.
Yeah. Right. Which you should go and have a watch, because I probably say things better there.
Yeah, and yesterday I think I mistook your stream today for that video yesterday.
Yeah, so... Well, the advice when I did it was 1.5 minutes per mark, but you guys now get an extra 15 minutes for the paper, I believe. So I don't entirely know how long it would take.
No. They do tend to change things up.
Obviously, halfway through the paper, aim to be halfway through the time, or preferably aim to be slightly faster than halfway through. So once you're halfway through the paper, hopefully you should be like not quite halfway through your time, so that you have time to go back and check over things.
Yeah. Just a question that I have. Do you know if it's AM or PM?
It's a PM exam.
Oh, okay. So they've still got a little bit of time left.
Still got a little bit of time.
Yeah, good. I've seen this one a couple of times. Can you predict the questions for this year's paper?
Can I predict the questions? There's only one previous paper to go on.
Yeah, I was going to say that the not only that, but there's so much that they can ask you, like
and also
history and English. Usually quite
having heard about the crime and punishment paper, they did a question on the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, which is a tiny little paragraph in one of the textbooks. Luckily, I had actually covered it in one of my videos by pure chance.
I was going to say, I thought I recognised it. Is it to do with Jack the Ripper?
Yeah, it was Jack the Ripper. Right. But yeah, they've gone very specific. That was quite a harsh question. Luckily, it was only 4 marks.
Not to confuse people, because this is A-level, but they did that a couple of years ago, I think, for my one. They asked this really specific question about education reform in post-war Britain, and thankfully our teacher had covered it. But I was talking to some people, on Twitter after it happened, and some sentence just went, well, this is just a footnote, why cover this?
Yeah, the whole of Twitter was not very happy about that Whitechapel Vigilance Committee question.
I don't blame them. It's, Yeah. Oh, Music Gecko says, Vigilance Committee was amazing, my friend informed me just before the exams.
Yes.
That was excellent luck. I feel like that always happens in a weird sort of coincidence.
Yes, you get these weird coincidences that you just happen to be revising the thing.
Yeah, it's proof of something. Random chance.
Proof that random chance exists.
No, I had that business this week. I had a question that I was scanning through the revision guide really quickly and just, random things. And one of them came up, and obviously that must mean that the stars have aligned and I'm in luck.
Yeah.
Yes. No more questions. I've just seen, can I start at the back of the paper tomorrow?
Yes. Start at the back of the paper. That is my personal...
I do that.
Yes. The one thing in this paper is where it's split into 2 sections. Some of the questions are bigger, so I would personally... Yeah, the very last question will be a 16 marker on... Well, I say the Saxons, whatever is your second section. So it might be like Elizabeth or whatever else you do instead of the Saxons. That would be like the biggest question. But there's also a 16 marker that's split into 2 at the end of the American West, or whatever you do instead of the American West section. But that's sort of like 2 8 markers.
Just a question about the structure of the exam. Do you get like one massive paper with every topic in?
Well, actually, that's an interesting thing. Someone told me in the comments earlier. Whereas we had it where there are 2 different types of paper. So you get you would say you're doing the American West. You would do the American West and medieval depth options, or there's the Tudor depth options. So the Anglo-Saxons is a medieval depth option.
Right. So
then you would get a choice between doing Anglo-Saxons or Richard and John in your paper.
Oh, I see. Right. Okay.
So you could potentially answer the wrong questions. Though I've been told today, apparently, they're actually going to do it as 2 papers in one sitting. So you're going to get your first paper, so in my case that would have been the American West, and they're going to then also give you the Anglo-Saxon paper, so you don't have the ability to answer the wrong questions.
Yeah.
Because apparently last year in the Tudor one, a lot of people did the wrong one, so they did Elizabeth, answered questions on Elizabeth instead of the Tudor Henry topic. Because apparently the Henry questions weren't very good.
I see.
Or a bit mean. And they were like, maybe you should answer questions on the topic you studied.
Well, yeah, that would make more sense. No, I know I keep talking about myself here.
You can talk about yourself.
English A-level, when you get into the exam room, and obviously your teacher doesn't prepare this because they're not going to waste 12 pages of printing budget. The whole paper will have like 10... 12 other questions for 5 or 6 other books. And I remember one year, thankfully, had realised in the middle of the exam this was the case, was talking about the wrong book and the wrong text. Thing is, though, that assessment was on a Shakespeare play, and it was an extract from that Shakespeare play with named characters.
Oh.
At that point, you have to lay some of the blame on yourself and post this thing. Othello, Taming of the Shrew, not the same thing. If anyone's learned anything tonight, it is that Othello and Taming of the Shrew are not the same thing.
Yeah, that's maybe not the one thing you should take away. I guess if there's no more questions.
Yeah, I think that's everything. Should I just say some thank yous to everyone in the chat?
Yeah, thanks to everyone in the chat.
Yeah, thanks to everyone in the chat, from Judah, Rakeem, Stabvest, and Music Gecko as well.
Yes, Music Gecko.
And everyone else. Thank you.
Yeah, also, good luck in your exam tomorrow.
Oh, yes, it is tomorrow, isn't it? So.
Yeah, it is tomorrow.
Right,
that's why it's happening today.
I wonder... one more thing before we go. Are we going to do one for the Interval Germany?
Yes. We're going to do a Germany stream.
Yes.
I think the paper's on Tuesday, so I guess that'll be Monday night.
Monday night? Okay, well, I can be here.
Yeah.
If you want me. Well, actually, that one I'll be able to help you with, because Shock Horror did really well.
Yeah. You actually... Byron did the old spec, so you'd have been Not the last year, but the year before that.
Year before. Oh no. Oh, I don't know.
No, the last, as in of the old spec.
Oh, of the old spec. Yeah.
Because you're 2 years older than me.
Yeah. So, yeah, Interwar Germany and the Cold War are like my two, things that I still know really well.
Yeah, and Germany came up on the old spec, so you might know not specifically what's on the thing, the spec, but it would be pretty similar.
It'd be pretty similar.
You know stuff about Germany.
Oh, obviously. It's not like we're going to change history. Or will they?
Dun dun dun. Also, go subscribe to Byron's channel. I think I put a link to it in the description.
Yeah, I heard, and you've also put a link on the channel page as well.
Yes, there's a link on my channel page that says fellow nerds you should subscribe to. So there's a link to Step Back, who's done quite a lot in promoting my channel. You should go watch him.
Yeah.
But yeah. Good luck, everyone.
Good luck.
Hope it goes well. You're now. Come.
Good luck.
Come join.
I don't want. Well, I'm just nervous, I get really giddy when I'm on, because I'm not really on camera very much. So.
Just get used to it. I'm
I don't know where
much
to
better
look.
than I was. I mean, I'm literally just looking at myself. I should be looking at there's a nice green light.
Yeah, I'm looking at the
here.
green light. Which.
Yeah. Say hi to the green light. That's
Hello, ominous green light. I feel like I'm just on the wrong. I'm just out of frame.
Yeah, just half out of frame. Anyway. There we go.
Good night.
Good luck, everyone. Good night.
Wrong way.
Enjoy your evening. Have a chill evening. I think you should have done enough revision by now.
Oh, yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
If you haven't done any revision, then that's probably bad. But I presume you haven't.
Watch this stream again.
Yeah.
Just replay the highlights.
Get our views up. Replay the bit with the technical issues.
Oh yeah.
Oh, and that first stream.
Oh, did I mention the first stream? I think might still be live.
Still live?
Yeah. Well. We think it. I haven't.
We'll go and sort out the first.
Yeah, we'll fix that.
Right.
Good night.
Bye. There it is. Stop streaming.
Good night.